I've been a trucker for varying companies for 10 years. 3 years ago, I was working for a warehouse company in Kansas doing shipments. I usually drove a semi, which is what I was behind the wheel of on February 2nd. It was a cold Monday, so the week was just starting and a lot of loads needed to be shipped, so I was trying to bang it all out quickly. I started driving at 3 p.m. and intended on getting to the destination that same night. I didn't want to have to pull off on the side of the road somewhere to sleep. I did around 5 above the speed limit after 12, which is fast for a semi. I was starting to feel very tired, but the destination was less than an hour away, and I figured I could do it. My eyes were getting dry, and it was starting to become a chore just to keep them wide open. I splashed some water on my hand and then rubbed it on my face. It helped a little bit in waking me up. My truck was the only vehicle on this road at this hour, so besides my headlights, the road was completely dark. I remember reaching to take a sip of my water and almost spitting it out when I saw a figure approaching fast up in the distance. I hit the brakes hard, and as the truck slowed down close to a halt, I could better distinguish the features of this person almost standing in the middle of the road. He seemed to be wearing all black with some kind of black scarf wrapped around his neck, and he had an unnaturally long neck. I know it's a weird thing to pick up on, but it was almost freaky looking. His face itself, however, was a complete blur. I couldn't make out any features. As my truck slowed down and got closer to this mysterious man, I was about to roll down the window to ask if he needed a ride, but he just turned to his left and darted into the woods. I didn't take an extra second to stop and think about it. I just pressed on the gas pedal again and moved on. Regardless of how freaky it was, I was in a rush. In fact, it wasn't even until about 20 seconds after that my heart really started racing from taking in how strange it really was. Maybe 5 minutes later, I was able to get over it. But just like that, something else happened. As I was back to my cruising speed, I saw something run across the street in front of me. At first, it looked like a big animal, but as I got closer and it crossed into the woods, I realized it looked like another person. I didn't even tap on the brakes this time, I just kept going. I kept zooming down the road, maybe even stepping on the gas a little more just because I was starting to get freaked out and wanted to get there faster. Another few minutes went by with nothing happening. However, I was getting increasingly tired, and at times I was even swerving into the other lane a little bit. 40 minutes or so left in the drive, and I didn't know if I could make it anymore. I started looking around for good places to pull over and park for the night. There was eventually a little opening on the side of the road made of gravel. I guess it was meant to be just a little parking rest stop kind of thing. I pulled the semi into it, parked it, and leaned back and rested my eyes. I fell asleep for not even an hour, just to wake up out of nowhere to the darkness. I still don't know what woke me up, but as I looked outside through the windshield, something in my gut was telling me to turn on the headlights, and so I flicked the knob and lights lit up the surrounding area in front of my truck. There was something in front of the truck though. A man. That same man with the black scarf I'd seen earlier standing on the side of the road. Now I could see his face much clearer. He had a very wide smile, and his eyes were open as wide as possible, and he looked right at me through the windshield. I turned the truck on and pulled it out of that little clearing as fast as possible. I didn't know what to think. How could he have walked 10 miles from where I'd seen him last? I didn't stop again that night until I made it to my destination. From there, I fell asleep in the parking lot and woke up early the next morning. Now, the only logical explanation I could think of is that my mind was playing tricks on me, because I had been seeing strange things all night. I've never heard of a hallucination being so vivid and terrifying though, and that's the part that still really confuses and scares me. Before getting an office job in the city, I was a UPS driver for 2 years. It was good money and I enjoyed it for the most part. It had its moments though. It was 2010. I'd been out of college for 2 years. I was working 11 to 7 on a Thursday. It was the dead of winter, so it was dark by like 5 o'clock. I wasn't exactly living in Palm Springs either. I was living in a small town in North Carolina. I don't want to call it ghetto or slummy, but it wasn't a very nice area at all. I did deliveries in that same town very often. The housing situation in this town was weird. Some blocks would have rows of houses and trailer homes spaced far away from each other, while other blocks were just completely desolate. This made for less deliveries altogether because the houses were so spaced out and far from each other that it took longer than, say, a regular suburban or urban community. Deliveries were always marked on the map so that I could take a more strategic route instead of just driving all over the place. After hours and hours of deliveries, all over a span of at least 3 different small towns, I started heading down one of those streets I'd mentioned just now. Spaced out trailer homes and small houses on one side, forest on the other side. It's a little past 6 p.m. and my shift is winding down with not too many deliveries left. There was one house on this block, and the package was to be signed for, meaning I couldn't just leave it on the stoop. I pulled up in front of the house, went to the back of the truck, and pulled out one of the biggest and heaviest boxes of the day. There were some kind of small metal pieces bumping around in the box, lots of them. I couldn't even try to take a guess at what could be inside. My job was just to lug the thing to the front door of the trailer home, and that's just what I did. There was no doorbell in this home, so I had to knock. There were no lights on in there though, and I didn't see a car out front, so I was hoping somebody was home. I knocked a few more times, then I saw the curtains to one of the windows move, and footsteps come to the door. Then there was a long pause, a suspicious and unnecessarily long pause before the door finally cracked open. Some older woman poked her head out all paranoid-like, and when I said she had a package to sign, she opened the door fully. She seemed fidgety as I asked her to sign the device. She did so. It was a sloppy signature too. She told me I'd need to help her carry the box into her room. I figured that would be the case. The moment I stepped into the trailer home, I got a huge whiff of some kind of stench. You know how every home has a distinct smell, whether it be good or bad? Well, this home smelled awful. I don't know what it was. She was leading me to a back section behind the tiny living room space. She took me to a narrow hallway where I struggled to carry the box, and then brought me to a door. She opened the door and told me to maneuver the box into the closet in the back of the room. I asked her to flick on the light. She said the light didn't work. It was next to pitch black in there, with the only source of light being the lamp from the living room seeping down the hall into this room. I could see just the slightest amount to navigate the box inside of the room. As I got close to the closet, I saw someone standing in the corner of the closet. I knew for certain it was a person because of the shape of the outline, and there was movement. There was no logical explanation to this. This person was clearly hiding from me, waiting. I left the box where it was and walked past the woman and said, "Have a nice day." She started to scream at me to come back and help her, then she went as far as to call me a piece of shit. I didn't know what this woman and whoever was in that closet were planning on doing, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I went on with my shift and went home that night, and thus began my job hunt for a newer, better job. I've been a truck driver since I was 25, and I've done a lot of night drives and of course had my fair share of odd experiences. I did deliveries for a number of different types of companies. Often I'd have to drive across state to make shipments to the receiving companies or stores. One day I had to drive literally from one side of California to the other to deliver a trailer full of wooden furniture items. Much of the drive was through open desert roads. It was going to be many hours, and I already had a late start to the day, so I knew a majority of my drive would be in the dark. Given the nature of these desert roads at night, how straight they are and how little traffic there is, it meant I could push the truck a little faster than I would on other roads. This meant that when I saw the flashing rear lights of a car in the horizon, I had to hit the brakes a little extra hard to bring the truck to a stop when I finally pulled up behind the car. It was an old Chevy Impala parked on the side of the road in the desert dirt. It had its hazards on. I got out of my truck because of course I had to be a good Samaritan and check if they needed help. I walked over to the car and tapped on the window, only to get no kind of response. I bent down a little to look into the car through the tinted window. There didn't seem to be anyone sitting inside. I did the same thing for all 3 other seats and could confirm there wasn't anyone in the car. So I looked out into the cool, dark desert that the road ran through, though I couldn't see any further than maybe 20 yards in front of me. I was feeling especially hopeful this night for some reason, so I went back to my truck and got a flashlight from the toolbox that sat underneath the passenger seat. It was a heavy-duty tactical flashlight that was so bright it would hurt your eyes to look directly at it. As soon as I turned it on, it revealed what appeared to be an abandoned gas station on the side of the road. Apparently I hadn't noticed it before. I guess the reason I didn't realize it before was because the whole fill-up or parking area was basically dirt. There wasn't any concrete. There were also only 2 gas pumps. Behind them was a small building, probably an old quick-stop store at one point. It would make the most sense that whoever's car was over there would be in that building. I went to the front door, which was permanently jammed open, and the flashlight lit up a decent portion of the room inside. It was what I thought, a big convenience store you'd find at many gas stations, or at least it used to be. It was no wonder it didn't last on a road like this, though. I called out to let anybody know of my presence, and that I was there to help. There was the slightest bit of echo in the room, which gave me chills for some reason. Then I heard something, probably a shoe, scrape against the floor on the opposite side of the room, behind a few shelves that were probably once filled with snack items and drinks. I called out once again, offering my help if it was needed. Then I heard a deep, heavy whisper saying, "Get out." I understood what was said immediately, but I didn't understand why whoever said it would say that. I was also hearing heavy breathing in one corner of the room. It was enough to make me get the hell out of there in a hurry. On my walk back to my truck, this is what I heard. And there had to be at least 5 seconds of confusion. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real or not, if that even makes sense. I ran to my truck and called 911 because, to be honest, I was too scared to go back in that building. They asked for an exact location and I couldn't tell them. All I could say was that I was by an abandoned gas station on some road in the desert. They asked me to stay on the line so I could describe my location better. But suddenly, the car in front of me turned on and started speeding down the desert road. I didn't even notice him get into his car. It was so dark and I was so distracted by the phone call. I ran back into the building to see if anybody was still in there, while of course keeping 911 on the line. I went to the back section where I'd heard the voice and breathing, and I was mortified to see a fresh pool of blood on the floor. I could only imagine what had happened. I explained into the phone that I believed I'd just stumbled into a crime scene. Eventually they were able to send a bunch of state troopers to the scene. They asked me for any information I could give, license plate number, what the suspect looked like, what I thought happened. All I said was it was a black Chevy Impala, early 2000s, and I heard a man tell me to get out before hearing a woman screaming as I left the building. There was no body left behind, but I had a few ideas of what might have happened. I'm sure the state police took some blood samples and whatnot, but I wasn't able to be of much more assistance. Shamefully, I did not have a dash cam at that point to get the license plate number, but literally the next week I installed the dash cam into my assigned truck. This was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences that will always haunt me. I experienced a sketchy situation on Halloween a couple years ago. My cousin came over for Halloween that year just to go trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and I know that's a bit old for trick-or-treating, but hey, it's free candy. My cousin was also 15, and we were planning on taking it easy that Halloween and just hitting enough houses to make a reasonable haul before we went home. My friend and his younger brother went with us, but we eventually went our separate ways. It was pretty busy, and there was a whole lot of kids at every house with decorations up. My cousin Jack and I decided to hit some of the houses with lights on with no kids already on the front stoops. Lots of houses that we had already hit before that had no decorations up and had lights on all had people inside ready to deliver candy to trick-or-treaters. But all the other kids I know for a fact target the heavily decorated houses. We ended up getting through like 4 houses in a minute because of no lineups. The next house in the line was not decorated at all, but there was a light on, so we thought we'd give it a shot. We knocked on the door, and immediately an older man opened the door. He opened it completely, which revealed 5 other guys just standing there. They were much younger than the older man who opened the door. I'm guessing they were in their late 30s, while the older man who opened the door was in his early 50s. He held out a bowl of candy, then reached in and grabbed some and put it in each of our bags. The older man asked Jack what his name was, and Jack responded to his question using a fake name. Jack said bye before the older man could say anything else. We walked off the front stoop, and alarms immediately started going off in my head. Jack seemed alarmed as well, and we started talking about how sketchy that was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we opened the door? Why were they all acting so strange? Those were the questions that were floating around in my head. Jack and I were a little spooked because of how weird that was. We went to 2 more houses, then we started walking to my house. Jack and I glanced back at that house to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove up the way we were walking and started slowing down right next to us. The roads were clear, and all the trick-or-treaters were on the sidewalks, so there should have been no reason the car slowed down right next to us. We picked up the pace a bit, and that's when another car sped up behind them, eventually beginning to go the same pace as the first car. I recognized the guy driving the first car, and the guy driving the second car. The guy driving the first car was the older guy who gave us the candy, and the driver in the second car was one of the 5 guys just standing there suspiciously. There was also somebody in the passenger seat in the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of the person. When Jack and I were 2 houses away from my house, we saw the first car park right across the street from my house. We didn't even see where the second car went, we just bolted back inside my house. Our parents, who were sitting in the living room talking, asked us what was wrong. We told them the whole story, and when we were finished, we went to the window to check if that car was still parked across the street, and it was. But then 5 seconds after I checked, it drove off. It had probably been parked there for the 5 minutes since we went inside my house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted Jack and I to go show our dads the house where all those guys were in. But eventually, our parents calmed us down and told us it was just a Halloween gag or something. Though I have my own theory on what was going on. The reason why there were 6 guys in the main doorway was because when a lone trick-or-treater or group of trick-or-treaters much younger than Jack and I came to the door, they were looking to jump or snatch them. But when they saw that Jack and I were teenagers and literally the same height as them, they decided to play it cool, even though they still looked sketchy. And why they were following us in their cars, we will never know. But when the night ended and everyone was off to bed, I realized that house is only 1 block from my house. This was many years ago. My old buddy Anthony and I were getting on our costumes to go trick-or-treating. We started going house to house just like a normal night. We got to the old part of our neighborhood, where our parents would tell us not to go because we were only 12 years old and we didn't know our way around there. We walked up to the first house there, and a nice lady opened the door who gave us big Hershey bars. After that, while we were walking to literally only the second house in this part of the neighborhood, this random guy came screaming and running towards us down the street. He came out from behind a church. We thought it was just a Halloween prank at first, like anyone would, so we stood there just laughing. But as soon as he got up to us, he tried taking the pillowcase full of candy out of my hands, so my buddy Anthony started hitting him with his pillowcase. By the time we got to this old neighborhood, we had a lot of candy, so being hit with that pillowcase surely had to hurt. Anthony was hitting him until he let go of the pillowcase and started running away. We thought that was the end of him, until we started walking back, extremely shocked and confused. I called my mom and asked her if she could pick us up because we were pretty far from home, and that whole experience kind of made us want to get off the streets. As soon as she got to our location, we explained what happened, and she almost didn't believe us. That's how ridiculous it sounded. We got home around 10 p.m., and shortly after that, there was a knock at the front door. My dad figured it was just a late-night trick-or-treater, so we went to answer the door, and standing there was a man in a jumpsuit with a Michael Myers mask. My dad was confused because he was wondering what he was doing out alone trick-or-treating, and based on his height and build, he looked like an older man, not a kid or a teenager. Either way, my dad just gave him candy and didn't really care to say anything. But while Anthony and I were sitting on the couch, we noticed him staring at us, like his masked face was staring right at us in the living room. I felt slightly unsettled by it and was waiting for him to just turn and leave. My dad ended up shutting the door in his face when he wouldn't walk away. So fast forward to like 1 in the morning. We were about to go to bed, but on our way upstairs, we heard a knock at the door. There was no way I was opening the door at that hour, and I knew this couldn't be anything good this late. So I went to tell my dad there was a knock at the door, and he said just ignore it. So Anthony and I go up to the room and turn on a movie. Anthony heard something though, and told me to mute the TV, And when I did, I heard it too. It was the sound of leaves crackling in the backyard. I looked in the backyard, and I saw that man in the Michael Myers costume, swinging on the swing set in our yard, staring into my bedroom window. I felt like my heart jumped out of my chest and up into my throat. It's like he was purposely recreating a scene from a horror movie to scare us. I ran into my dad's room and told him that the man in the Michael Myers costume was on our swing set. He took on this expression of shock and concern just like ours, and he looked outside, but he didn't see anyone there. Then, right when we were looking, we heard a knock at the back door. My dad went downstairs to the door, but nobody was there. This man was toying with us, harassing us to scare us. It had to be a Halloween prank. My dad was equally concerned now. All of a sudden, I heard my mom scream in the other room. So Anthony, my dad, and I ran upstairs to see the man in the Michael Myers costume standing at the end of the bed staring at my mom. My dad told Anthony and I to run and call the police. My friend and I ran downstairs and grabbed the nearest phone. We called 911 and told them that a man dressed as Michael Myers had broken into our house. The operator asked if everyone was all right. I said he's upstairs, and my dad has him, but we needed cops immediately. She told me to stay on the phone and that police were en route to the house. From upstairs, there was the sound of my dad screaming, followed by their sliding window being pushed open. The two of us ran upstairs to see my mom and dad laying on the floor. My mom was crying, and my dad's nose was bleeding. My dad said the man jumped out through the window. When the police arrived, Anthony, my dad, and I told them everything we could. They did a sweep of the property inside and out, which took about 20 minutes, and the premises was clear. I think that might have been my last year trick-or-treating, and for good reason. I still wonder if the man that tried to take my candy was the man wearing the Michael Myers costume, and I deeply regret leaving that part out of the story we gave to the police. Halloween was always one of my least favorite days of the year. I never had a lot of friends in middle school or high school, so I never really had any plans on Halloween. In middle school, I didn't really go trick-or-treating, and in high school, I never really went to any Halloween parties. This was also at a time when my sister was away at college, so due to the fact that my parents were hardly ever home, I'd usually be home alone. This was one of many Halloween nights that I was left home alone. Halloween was on a Friday this particular year, so kids were out in droves and later than usual. My parents were gone for the week. My mom left a bunch of bags of candy for me to hand to kids. I got kind of sick of the doorbell ringing every 5 minutes all day, so eventually I just poured an entire bag of candies into a plastic bowl we had in one of the kitchen cabinets. My mom never really liked leaving a bowl on the stoop, but she wasn't there, so what was she gonna do? That lasted a good while because the constant ringing of the doorbell stopped for a couple hours at least, and when the bowl was empty, I refilled it. I wasn't expecting to hear the doorbell again the rest of the night because even if the bowl were emptied, I assumed people would know not to bother ringing the bell at a house with an empty bowl. So when the bell did ring again, I was not only surprised, but also felt a hint of annoyance. I ignored the first ring, but about 30 seconds later, there was another ring. This time I got up from my computer, pausing the game I was playing, and went down to check who was at the front door. I opened the door, and there were two guys in white vendetta masks holding small plastic bags with very minimal candy inside, it seemed. Neither of the two of them said trick or treat. They just ominously both stood there, and then lifted up their bags and held them open. I said, "Hang on, I'll get more candy." I felt intimidated, if I'm being honest. I went to get the bag of Reese's and grabbed a few to put in their bags. When I dropped the candies in their plastic bags, one of them, I don't know which, asked in a monotone voice, "Are you home alone?" I said no, but with a stutter because the question scared me. I said, "My parents are here." Then I said, "Have a good night," and shut the door. I waited by the door listening to see if I'd hear them walk down the steps. I finally heard footsteps leaving, so I felt relieved and started going back upstairs. But that question, "Am I home alone?" kept haunting me. I couldn't just go back to my game after hearing that. And then I realized the possibility as to why they would have asked me that, because there were no cars at all in the driveway or in front of the house, yet the lights were on. Then when I, an at the time 14-year-old kid, opened the door, I probably looked like the easiest target ever. My paranoia was clearly justified though, because while sitting at my desk trying to get back into my game, I heard this loud bang from my window. I was on the second floor, so clearly something was just thrown at the window. My heart started to pound the inside of my chest again. In response, I turned off the computer screen and desk lamp to bring darkness into the room. I then looked out the window, and though I couldn't see anything out there because it was too dark, another object was thrown at the window right in front of me, this one scaring me even more than the last. It sounded like a rock. I instantly felt this intensifying sense of danger. I ducked back down behind the window and left my bedroom. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, only an iPod Touch, so I had to get to the kitchen house phone. I crawled my way down the stairs so not to be seen through any of the windows. I got to the kitchen phone and dialed 911, but I think they saw even just the light from the little screen of the phone, because there was suddenly an aggressive banging on one of the kitchen windows. By now I was on the phone with 911 begging for help. As I crouch walked out of the kitchen and towards the back door, I screamed, realizing there was one of the guys in the vendetta masks on the other side of the back door, trying to open it. I started screaming into the phone for help, but around the same time, a familiar voice was calling from the other side of the front door. It was our next door neighbor, Chris. I rushed to answer the door and he came in, clearly happy to see I was okay. He took the phone from me and spoke to the police for me. He saw the two masked men enter my backyard from his kitchen window and saw them throwing multiple things at the windows of the house. By the time any police officers arrived at the house, those two masked men clearly knew better than to have stuck around. Chris invited me to sleep at his place for the night just to be safe. He was good friends with my dad before he moved, so he really didn't mind helping me. Having good relations with your neighbors may just save your life one day, you never know. What I do know is this experience made me hate Halloween just that much more. My wife and I got married in the Church of the Little Flower in Coral Gables, Florida in 2017. We invited all of our close friends and family, including the family that neither of us really liked, because that's just what you're supposed to do. My wife Allie has this estranged aunt Chelsea that no one in her family is really close with. She used to have serious drug problems. It spiraled her down a path that just led to a rift between her and the rest of the family. Well, Aunt Chelsea was invited to the wedding, and when she showed up, she surprisingly came with a date, but unsurprisingly, he didn't look like the kind of guy you want to bring home to mom and dad. Right from the first time I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different, not in a pleasant, quirky way. After the wedding ceremony, of course, came picture time. The 6 bridesmaids, 6 groomsmen, and my wife and I all went to this nice backyard section of the church campus to have pictures taken by the hired photographer. Some close family from both sides came along as well to watch while most others went to the party hall. Aunt Chelsea and her date came to watch us take pictures as well. This was when I first got his name, Rob. The two of them were making everyone uncomfortable, like everyone in the bridal party would joke around and we'd genuinely laugh. Then either Chelsea or Rob would yell out these weird, inappropriate things. They just kept doing it to the point where they created awkward silences, and all of us were just internally cringing, dreading what weird things they'd say next. It got very awkward very quickly, let's just say that, to the point I wanted them to leave altogether. Anyway, we eventually finished with pictures. Then we migrated to Comber Hall, the party hall connected to the church, where food and drinks were being served. Being the groom, all the attention is on you at all times. You barely have a chance to sit down and gather your thoughts or even eat. Every second I had someone else coming up to congratulate me, and eventually that person was Rob. He shook my hand again, his breath terrible, and his arms scarred up. He wasn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt, rather a stained gray polo. He seemed like a filthy person all around. He started talking to me with this loud, almost demeaning tone. I did my best to just be polite, and eventually he walked back to Chelsea. This was the last time I saw him that day. Eventually I saw Chelsea sitting by herself at the table, so I asked Allie where that Rob guy went. She had no idea either. After a while of Chelsea sitting by herself, Allie went up to her to ask her where her date was. Chelsea didn't know. She hadn't seen him in an hour. Chelsea also explained that they met in rehab, and that she had only gone out with him 4 times. Allie grew concerned with this man being here after hearing this. We asked our parents and some close family to look around for the man, to confirm if he was still there or not. There was some concerning news when one of my relatives said that some of the gifts in the room where the gifts were being stored were missing. We immediately attributed this to Rob, and had an employee ask over the microphone for everybody to keep an eye out for Rob. Chelsea wanted to call his cell, but she couldn't find her phone. This put a slight damper on things, but we didn't let it ruin our wedding day. Our parents called the police and dealt with them on the side, with the help of Chelsea giving information about Rob. After the wedding reception, a few close friends came back to our hotel room for a little after-party of sorts. Chelsea had texted Allie asking for our home address, because she had to drop off her gift that she forgot to give. Allie responded, and then our good time was interrupted by a distressing phone call from Chelsea's phone number. Allie turned off the music and put it on speakerphone. There was a male's breathing on the other end, like horror movie shit, like he was trying to creep us out. Allie kept asking where Chelsea was, to no avail. Eventually the person on the other end hung up. Allie called her grandma, who was the only one close enough with Chelsea to know where she would be, and she confirmed that Chelsea was staying with her for the night. Chelsea got on the phone and said she lost her phone at the wedding, and she didn't know her Apple ID or password, therefore she couldn't even track it with Find My iPhone. Our best guess was that it was that Rob guy. We were now concerned that he knew our address and that we weren't home. We were too drunk to go home, so we asked my dad to stay there for the night and watch the house. He gladly did so. And the next morning, we woke up to texts and missed calls from my dad. He said someone kept tapping on different windows to the house, as if to be messing with him. He called the police, but they didn't find anyone. That same day, we went to the police station to see what could be done about pursuing Rob, who we suspected was the one behind all of this. But without video cameras catching the thief in Comber Hall, and given that Chelsea's phone had been turned off or destroyed, there was little to nothing the police could do. Chelsea told us that she and Rob had gotten into a verbal argument, and that he blamed us for whatever she was saying. He thought we didn't like him, and in his words, we sabotaged him. This just further led us to believe he was responsible for that weird phone call and coming to our house in an attempt to scare or harass us. We never saw or heard from that Rob guy again, and we have only started to further distance ourselves from Chelsea after that. I had a pretty low-key beach wedding, mostly just family and friends. My wife, who I'll just call Trisha, invited more people than me for sure. She even invited her ex-boyfriend Kyle. I didn't know exactly how I felt about that at the time, but I acted accepting and fine with it because I knew they remained close friends. There were about 75 people at the wedding ceremony, including Kyle. I didn't pay it much mind the day of the wedding because it was such a big day and my mind was obviously racing. Kyle was friendly to me, but throughout the wedding reception, I noticed Kyle would constantly be talking to Trisha, and when he wasn't talking to her, he'd be looking in her general direction. I mean, Trisha and I were married now. It's not like he had any shot at all. So at the time, I started to think maybe I was just being a little too paranoid, even if it was slightly annoying. Kyle came alone to the wedding though, which I thought was just a tad weird that he didn't bring a date. My wife and I stayed in a fancy waterfront hotel that night, and the next day we went back home. A couple people who didn't make the wedding came by the house to congratulate us and drop off gifts. Surprisingly, Kyle stopped by as well. Trisha and I had recently moved into a new house together, and Kyle claimed to have stopped by to check out our new place and to drop off his gift that he didn't get to give us yesterday. He handed us, well, Trisha specifically, an envelope and a little foot-long teddy bear holding a heart. On the heart was our initials, which I actually found to be a nice, thoughtful gift. We gave Kyle a tour of the house and he stayed for a beer, but after that he said he'd better get going and congratulated us once more before leaving. Inside the envelope was a card containing $100. As nice as I thought the gifts were, I still believed he had some serious feelings for Trisha, and I asked her to ease back on the friendship a bit. She couldn't see what I saw though, apparently. She swore up and down that they were just very close friends and that there were no feelings left on either side. Trisha put the teddy bear next to some of the other gifts on our dressers. While my wife and I were in bed together having a romantic moment, I stopped her when I heard this weird noise. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but it sounded like a small electrical component. I looked around for my phone and found it was on my nightstand. I chalked it up to being a vibration from a text notification. Like half an hour later, laying in bed with the light off, I once again brought up Kyle, asking if he'd texted her since the day before. She said he has, and I got a little annoyed. I repeated myself, saying I don't want her talking to him anymore. She got a little mad at me for accusing her of being interested in him at all. I assured her he was still interested in her. Why else would he stick around in his ex's life like this? She got back at me with her assurance that she doesn't view him romantically at all, that she's no longer attracted to him, and that she broke up with him for a reason. She followed this with she will ease back on her contact with him. I apologized for coming at her like that, and we went to sleep. The next day, when I got home from work, Trisha exclaimed that Kyle randomly blocked her on Instagram, and when she texted him asking what's wrong, he replied, "What do you care? I heard the things you said." When she tried texting back asking what he was talking about, she saw that he blocked her number now too. I wondered if maybe she butt-dialed him on her phone while we had that conversation the previous night. But when she checked her call history, his name wasn't there. I wasn't angry though. Him blocking her meant I was right. He did still have feelings, and now he'd be gone. That night while in bed, we talked about it some more. Then I heard the little electronic vibrating sound again. I looked at the teddy bear on the dresser. Then I got up and went to pick it up, and my heart dropped. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to tear the bear open. Trisha realized it immediately too. The inside of the bear's head was a square electrical component wired to what was very obviously a camera behind the left eye and a microphone box wired to the left ear. This was connected to some kind of Bluetooth device that would probably allow a phone to send and receive data. We went to the police that night with the teddy bear and filed a police report. We then hired a lawyer and pressed charges against Kyle for invasion of privacy, and the judge ruled in our favor and required Kyle to pay us $15,000 each. Trisha also got a restraining order against him, and that was the end of him in our lives. Though we still do sometimes worry that he may pay us an unexpected visit. If he was crazy enough to wire a teddy bear to spy on us and possibly watch us in bed together, who knows how far someone like that is capable of going. I live in a safe town, the kind of town that you can leave your car doors unlocked. Hell, you can usually get away with leaving the doors to your house unlocked. The crime rate is very low, and I live on a dead-end block. I had just gotten home from work around 8 p.m. after a 12-hour shift and was preparing a late dinner when the phone rang. The second I picked up, I heard the sound of the person on the other end hanging up. I don't know if this has any correlation with what's to come, but if it does, that's even more horrifying. On nights where I get home late, especially after 12-hour shifts, usually I'll just cook, eat, clean up, take a shower, then lay in bed watching TV for an hour before going to sleep. This was one of those nights. I was physically and mentally exhausted, which led me to making what I learned that night was a serious mistake. I was laying in bed watching The Sopranos for my third run. Sometimes I'll drift off to sleep with the TV still on when I'm just completely beat, and that's exactly what happened this night. I woke up to the TV still playing The Sopranos. I had slept through 2 episodes. I felt around the bed for the remote and turned it off. In the now freshly silent room, I was able to hear little creaks in the wood under the carpet. I felt adrenaline kick in as I looked across the dark room, and I felt I could vaguely see the shape of a very wide figure. As I aimed the remote at the TV to turn it back on to light up the room, before the TV was even on, I started choking on my own spit as I tried to say, "Please leave." The TV came back on, and the room lit up a tint of blue, revealing her. This woman in a wedding dress, looking at me, with the veil covering her face. I tried to scream at first, but nothing came out of my mouth because I was just in pure shock. I sat up, pressed against the headboard of my bed, frozen. That's the best way I can describe what I was doing in that moment. The woman in the dress, whose face I could barely see, walked over to the bed, whispering, "Where is my groom?" over and over, but each time she said it, she got louder. Her whisper quickly turned to a yell, and she grabbed the edge of my mattress and started shaking it. I screamed back at her to leave me alone. Then I got off the bed, pushed her, and ran to the bathroom across the hall and locked the door. She followed me, trying to open the door, banging on it and repeating the words, "Where's my groom?" I yelled at her I'm calling the cops, and luckily I had my cell phone on me. The woman was crying now on the other side of the door, still knocking and banging. The last thing I heard her say was, "I have to get to my wedding." I heard her stomp down my stairs, screaming and crying. Then I heard the front door slam shut. I was on the phone with 911, and I explained what just happened. I checked the living room, and she was gone. I stepped outside to see if I could see which way she ran, but she was out of sight. A police officer showed up shortly, and I described her as some larger woman in a white wedding dress and veil. How she was screaming, "Where's my groom?" and "I have to get to my wedding." I couldn't help with the direction she ran to. It was either down the only direction the street goes, or the woods to the right. Because of my exhaustion after my 12-hour shift, I had forgotten to simply lock my door, something I honestly never even thought was a problem in my neighborhood. But this just goes to show that even the best of neighborhoods, you're not always safe from crazy people out there. I think this woman was off her rocker and belonged in a mental asylum, and I hope police or somebody found her roaming the streets that night and brought her somewhere to get her help. A few months ago, I treated my girlfriend to a vacation in Paris. We stayed at some hotel called Hotel Atmospheres. My job allows me to work remotely from my laptop on my own hours, so at some points during our couple days there, I would sit in the lounge of the hotel by the Wi-Fi area to get my work done. My phone started to ring. It was my girlfriend calling me. As I picked up the phone, I went to the nearby room where the coffee was and poured myself a cup. My girlfriend was calling me from the room, talking about the things we should do that day. When I walked back to the lounge area where I left my laptop, I got a sickly feeling when I realized it wasn't there anymore. I went first thing to the lady at the front desk to ask her if she'd seen anyone leave the lounge area with a laptop. She apologized and said she hadn't seen anyone. I asked her to check the cameras, to which she responded with there not being any cameras in the lounge area, and that she was also not in control of the footage that the cameras caught. She would have to get in contact with her manager, who was not working that day. She offered I submit a lost or stolen property form. I was absolutely disgusted with the service, and planned on having a word with the manager the next day. I had no choice but to go back to our room and angrily vent to my girlfriend. She tried calming me down, saying there was nothing we could do about it, and that it was best we just go out and enjoy the vacation I was paying for. As angry as I was, I had to accept that she had a point. We both turned off notifications on our phones so we wouldn't be distracted, something we usually did on vacation. Then we went out and explored a great amount of the city, did a little bar hopping, then got back to our hotel late at night. It wasn't until we finally crashed into bed that I opened my phone to check for new emails and texts and such, since I couldn't do that on my laptop now. When I was going through my email, I realized every single email I'd received that day was opened. This included emails from work and a couple relatives. I started to panic because I knew how much delicate information I had in not just my email account, but my whole computer, which was signed in when I left it. I basically had all my personal information saved on that computer, including home address, phone numbers, personal pictures, passwords, credit card info, bank account info. I was a fool for leaving it unattended to for even a minute. I immediately changed all the passwords to my emails and other important accounts. That didn't matter for what was about to come, though. After opening my messages app to check my texts since I hadn't been all day, I noticed text from an unknown number. It was a bunch of pictures that were saved on my computer. Bad, personal pictures that I wouldn't ever want anyone to see. Then there were pictures I didn't remember taking, pictures of a hotel hallway and a hotel door. It was our hotel door. There was also a picture of me standing at the front desk talking to the lady about my missing laptop. It was taken from behind the glass door at the entrance of the hotel. Under all of the pictures was a text saying, "I have all of your info, including your address and your current hotel room. This was sent using an untraceable phone number. Don't bother contacting the police. The rest of the message basically demanded I pay a certain amount of Bitcoin to a specific Bitcoin wallet address, or else. It literally said or else. I'm not even fabricating this. I didn't know what else to do besides show my girlfriend the messages, as well as the embarrassing pictures. She started to panic more than me, and she honestly just made me even more tense. I left the room to go to the bathroom to think. He was asking for $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, but even if I paid that, I had no reassurance that this person wouldn't share those pictures or keep my laptop or do God knows whatever or else meant. I decided I wouldn't pay the ransom. My girlfriend agreed with my decision when I went back to bed. Of course, I was not tired at all anymore, neither was my girlfriend. We sat up, leaning on the headboard of the bed, talking, thinking, and worrying for a couple hours. Then there was a knock at the window of our hotel room. We both gasped, while my girlfriend more so let out a short scream. I turned off the lamp so that whoever was out there couldn't see in. I also shut the shade completely. I didn't bother trying to look out there to see who it was. I assured my girlfriend we were safe though. She whispered we should call the cops or inform the front desk. I told her we would if the problem persisted. I then told her to go to sleep. Meanwhile, I stood in the middle of the room watching over her while also looking back at the window. I got a text. I looked at my phone and it said, "I'm looking into your room right now. I'm not playing games." Then there was another knock at the window. I decided to just grow a pair for a couple seconds and open the shade to see who was out there. I pulled the shade open. I couldn't see who it was, but there was someone standing on the other side of the glass looking in. My girlfriend screamed. I told her shh as I pulled it back shut. We packed our things and went to the front desk, telling the lady about the whole situation and requesting another room on one of the upper level floors. She said she would alert the authorities and gave us a room card to another room on the 3rd floor. For the rest of the night, we slept close together. Well, I didn't sleep. I was awake all night waiting for a knock at the door. Morning came and the manager was in, so she took a look at the footage from the previous night, and of course, some guy with a baseball cap covering 90% of his face went into the lounge as soon as I left it to get coffee, then walked out with my laptop. There was only one camera that actually caught the man in the act. She said she would forward all video footage with that man over to the police. We were out of there. I blocked the number that was texting me. I had to accept defeat, but I didn't want to think about it anymore. There was nothing I could do about where those pictures would end up or some random person having my address. I canceled my credit cards and changed my passwords. There wasn't much else that creep could do. However, what really motivated me to share this story with the internet was the fact that 3 days ago, I got a letter in the mail without a return address. It was addressed to me, and it was a short, straight-to-the-point note saying, "I hope you haven't forgotten. I have all of your information still." It was a horrible reminder that someone out there with bad intentions has not only my address, but my pictures, my phone number, and my name. I've been sleeping with one eye open these past few nights. If anything happens, I will update. There was a time a few months ago that my good friend Ashley lost her phone. I'm her best guy friend, so she hit me up on her sister's phone when she realized that whoever had her phone was reading her messages but not responding. I practically reprimanded her for not having a password on her phone. I suggested using Find My iPhone, but she didn't even have that enabled for whatever reason. I met up with her and decided to text her number. I sent a text saying, "Please return my friend's lost phone." Within seconds, it said the person read my text, but they didn't respond. So a minute later, I sent a more aggressive follow-up text. I said, "We can see that you're reading our messages. If you don't respond, we will brick the phone, track it, and it will be useless to you. Please return it now." The person read it right away and said, "Good luck." This infuriated me. I tried to respond, but apparently the person turned off the phone. There wasn't anything we could do now. She had Find My iPhone off, so we couldn't even report it as lost. I tried to make her feel better and took her out for dinner. When we got back to her house, a light upstairs was on and the garage door was open. "Are your parents home?" I asked her. "Maybe," she said, "but they weren't supposed to be back from their trip until the next day." We went in through the garage door, and she pressed the button to close it. Then we went from the den to the living room, and she called out for her parents. One of the doors upstairs shut. We could see and hear it. The way her house is arranged allows you to see some of the doors upstairs from the living room. The door wasn't shut forcefully, though. It was shut quietly and softly. Ashley looked at me, and I could see fear in her expression. I told her wait there, I'd go upstairs and check. So I went slowly up the stairs, down the little walkway, got to the door, looked down at Ashley one more time, then opened it. The room was dark now. I looked for the light switch in the room, but couldn't find it. So I said to Ashley, "Where's the light switch?" Then she screamed, "Oh my God." She said that she had her address and the code to the garage saved on her phone. It took me a second to put together what she was implying, when just then, someone grabbed my arm from inside the room and tried pulling me in. I screamed and tugged away from the grip. I started to slam the door over and over on the arm that was pulling at me, eventually getting them to let go. I heard grunting on the other side. I must have done some damage. I told Ashley to run as I came down the stairs. The front door was only a few feet away, so we got out safely. We got into my car and I called the cops right away. We sat in front of the house in my car the whole time, making sure whether to know he left the house or not. The light upstairs turned on, and 5 seconds later, whoever it was walked to the window and just stood there for a while. Couldn't tell what he was looking at, nor could we see any facial features, but I did snap at least 10 pictures to show the police when they were to arrive. Then, the guy just walked away from the window and the light shut off. Minutes later, 2 cop cars with their lights on came speeding down the road and stopped in front of the house. I showed them the pictures before they entered the house, and we waited in my car. The cops were in there a long time. They did a seriously thorough investigation of the house. They came back out to assure us it was safe to go back in. We thought for sure they would be able to track the phone now that it was used as part of a crime, but to our surprise, they said there really wasn't anything they could do without Find My iPhone enabled, or the phone actually being on for that matter. All they said we could and should do was change the code for the garage lock. I had to figure out how to do that for her, but still after that, I let Ashley sleep in my house that night, and when her parents got back the next day, she felt a lot safer. She got a new phone the next day, and we never pursued finding her stolen phone any further. March 8th, 2019, on a Friday night. Me and 5 of my college buddies had a little night out. Not anything crazy, we just got dinner at some nice restaurant, then we hit a dive bar in the same block. We got a few drinks, played darts, and within a couple hours we were out. It wasn't until we left the bar that I realized my pockets were feeling kind of light. I checked both of my pockets and realized I didn't have my phone. I told my friends to wait as I ran back inside to look for it. I checked the seats at the bar, at the area by the dartboard. I even asked the bartender. He hadn't seen it though. A couple of my friends came in, and I asked one of them to call my number, but quickly realizing that was kind of pointless in a loud, crowded bar. I asked the bartender to please call my number if my phone were to turn up. Sadly, I knew that was wishful thinking. We traced back to the restaurant to check the table we sat at, and I asked the staff if they had any missing phones. None. So it was safe to assume my phone was taken by someone at this point. But I still remained hopeful that maybe the bar or restaurant would call me the next day. That night, when I got home, I started cleaning myself up, getting ready for bed. For some reason, it took me that long to remember I could just use that Find My iPhone feature. I would have to sign into iCloud on my computer to use it. But when I was all signed in and everything, and that little map came up on the screen, I was confused when the phone was showing up as right above my house. For a second I felt excited, like maybe I had the phone on me the whole time. I checked the pockets of the jeans I was wearing, but it wasn't there. I had no other pockets, and I knew 1000% I had my phone with me at some point in the restaurant. So how could it be at my house? Maybe someone left it at my front door. So I went outside and checked the stoop and the mailbox. It wasn't there either. Either way, it was insanely late and I was exhausted. As long as it said my phone was currently at my house, I figured I'd find it in the morning and figure out what happened. So after coming back inside the house, I did one last loop around the house, turning off all the lights and going upstairs. I sleep with the door open because I live alone. At some point, before finally climbing into bed, I heard a rattle from downstairs. It sounded like the pots and pans rack being banged into. I tiptoed downstairs. I saw that there was a light on down there somewhere. The light was leaking ever so slightly into the living room. I got to the kitchen and no one was in there, but for half a second I could see the light from my sunroom on. It turned off just as soon as I noticed it. I walked through the kitchen to the glass door that led to the adjacent sunroom. I would have to walk inside of there to turn the light on, and there was no way I was about to do that. So I just went as close to the door as possible and looked inside. I came close to screaming out loud when I could make out two figures standing in the darkness that was my sunroom. They were both standing nearly identically the same way, arms and legs kind of spaced out from their bodies to give an overall wider appearance to their stature. It seemed as though they had their backs to me, as I couldn't see their faces, only blackness, which I assumed was their hair. I ran to grab the kitchen phone to call 911. I reported a break-in, so the operator said there would be police arriving shortly, who would sneak up to the house, find the point of entry for the intruders, and apprehend them. The operator said the police would call me if they needed to, and asked me to hide in a closet and wait there until I heard the police downstairs. Then she told me to hang up and stay as quiet as possible. Waiting in that closet felt like it was taking centuries, mostly because of the tension of waiting in silence and motionlessness, expecting and dreading hearing any kind of noise. And actually, I did. I heard loud clonking footsteps coming from downstairs. They were coming up the stairs. They got louder and closer. Pretty soon they were near to the outside of the bedroom, but I never heard them enter the bedroom. I heard doors opening, doors to every room upstairs, until finally the door to the bedroom I was in opened. I balled up as little as possible in the corner of the closet, tucked under a blanket to hide myself. The closet door opened, and I felt my heart in my throat at this point. I did my best not to move, even though I felt my life flashing before my eyes. The door to the closet shut, and I heard footsteps leaving the room. Then I heard two pairs of footsteps go downstairs. I felt it was finally safe to move and breathe. After a few minutes of silence, the next sounds I heard were the voices of police officers yelling downstairs. I jumped out from the closet and rushed down to them. They entered through the sunroom actually, apparently the same way the intruders did. There were a total of 4 police officers in my house. The 2 intruders seemed to be gone, which was no surprise, one of the officers said. Usually the intruders would be out of the house before the cops arrive. So one of them had a notepad in hand and was taking down notes for my description of the whole night. They even took down the specific details of my phone and reported it as a lost item to somehow help with the case. After that, the cops left, but assured me there would be a car patrolling the area all night. The next day, I found my phone left on the kitchen counter. I figured they must have left it to avoid being tracked any further, and because it was useless to them. My 2 friends joked around that the 2 intruders were simply trying to return my phone and that I should find them and thank them. Nothing has happened since, but it's hardly been a month, so I'm still kind of uneasy about sleeping in this house.
I unfortunately had to move back with my family after my most recent breakup. He and I were living in Boston together in an apartment we got. Just a little word of advice. Never sign a lease with someone who you recently got into a relationship with. He was not the person I thought he was. My parents live in western Massachusetts. If you've ever been to Massachusetts, you'd know the more west you get, typically the more rural it gets. I'm not a big country girl. I like to be in or near a major city, especially since I'm in my 20s still. My parents' area is super boring. I'm hoping I'm only here temporarily until I find another apartment I can afford myself, though I'll be staying away from Boston for reasons. I had to get a job back at the urgent care facility I used to work at before I moved. They welcomed me back excitedly, even if it is just temporarily until I move again. The trade-off with this job, though, is that I tend to work undesirable hours, meaning overnights. Though the shifts are easy, they're boring, and they entirely mess up my sleep schedule and social life. Not that social life is even the best around here. After my shifts, sometimes I'll stop for what's considered my dinner, usually takeout since not much is open at these hours. Though this morning, I got out at 4 a.m., and there's a bagel place that opens at that time, and they serve a lot of types of food. So I stopped by there and grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad. I was going to eat it once I got home. I also had to make a pit stop for gas as well. I stopped at the local Shell station, one of the few gas stations open at this hour that was on the way home. The parking lot for this station is huge, and yet I hardly ever see any other cars in there, even during the day. I went inside to pay cash to save a little money. I went back outside to the pump, and there was now another car at one of the other pumps. It was a blue sedan. A guy got out of the car as I was walking over to the pump I was at. As I began fueling, I noticed him start to fuel up as well. I guess he locked the handle in place so that it would automatically keep dispensing gas without him holding it, because he walked through the 2 pumps to my side, and then said to me, "Want to see a funny trick?" I immediately hated this interaction. Still, for some reason, I said, "What's the trick?" He then started doing that stupid old trick where you pretend you're pulling your finger off with your other hand by just folding it down. He kept looking down at his hands and then back at me with this kind of sarcastic looking expression, as if he knew what he was doing was stupid, but honestly I couldn't tell. I fake laughed so that he'd go away, but he didn't stop. He kept doing the trick even after I looked away and tried my best to pretend not to notice anymore. When I felt the click of the gas nozzle indicating that the tank was full, I was so relieved. I quickly relatched the nozzle to the pump and hurried inside for my change. When I came back outside, the man wasn't in sight anymore, yet his car was still there, and the hose was still pumping gas into his car. I didn't want to stick around to catch his attention again. I got back in my car, though just out of paranoia, I checked the back seats just to make sure he wasn't hiding back there. I locked the doors, and then I was back on the road. I was home in about 5 minutes after that. I was so excited to eat my 4:30 a.m. dinner. I picked up the spare from my parents' hiding spot, unlocked the door, and then quickly hid it back in its hiding spot. I locked the door once I entered, as I always do. I went straight to the kitchen to eat. I make sure to be quiet when I get home late so as not to wake up my parents. We only have 2 cars in the family, so I share my mom's car. I didn't need a car in Boston anyway, but since I moved back, I had just been using the hidden spare key they would hide in the front to let myself in. As I was at the table eating, I heard the front door being unlocked and then opening and closing. I stopped chewing and froze to listen. With a mouth full of food, I said, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. I didn't hear any footsteps or anything. I hurried out of the kitchen to take a peek in the foyer. No one was in there. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I ran up the stairs to my parents' room and barged in. I was horrified to see both my parents in bed, and they were both awoken to my very forceful opening of the door. I said very quietly but in a clear panic that someone just came inside the house. My dad jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I cautiously followed behind him. He turned on all the lights of every room we passed, then he went out front to check for the spare key, and it was missing. My mom and I were absolutely horrified, yet my mom still found the time to lecture me for not checking my surroundings before re-hiding the key. My dad began searching every room in the house, and we followed. When he was done checking my older brother's room, he left to continue searching and left the lights on in here. I stayed behind in this room, and decided to check a couple of the spots that I felt my dad had missed, because I know internally I didn't expect to find anyone. I checked under the bed, and then I checked the closets. Nothing. So I went downstairs to the main floor. It seemed my dad was already checking the basement. I was honestly horrified to go into the basement right now, even with my dad down there. So I stayed on the middle floor with my mom. But curiosity still got me, and I went to the dining room, which is adjacent to the foyer by the front door. I got down on my knees and looked under the table, and there he was. It truly did not feel real. There was that man from the gas station, hiding under the dining room table. I recognized him instantly. I screamed as loud as I could, and in response, my mom started to scream too. My 65-year-old dad came up the stairs as fast as he could, ready to fight this intruder. The man came out from under the table and began fending off my dad, who is at least 20 years his senior. And as my mom and I saw him overpowering my dad, we began doing whatever we could as well, hitting and punching at the man as my dad still held on to him. It was when all three of us were attacking him that he finally decided to retreat and fled through the front door. This was when we called the cops, and thank God for a quick response time. However, that man still had the key to the front door. That night, the police left a police car parked in our driveway to deter that man from coming back. My dad wedged a chair in front of the front door as well and slept in the living room. The next day, he switched out the lock to the front door, and with that, my parents' days of hiding a key outside were over. I do feel guilty for bringing that dangerous man to my parents' house, and it was definitely on me for being careless. But honestly, I think that man followed me with his headlights off, because I didn't see any cars behind me the entire ride home. I'm happy for my and my family's safety though. However, this just made me want to move out of here even more. I like driving at night because there's nothing more that I hate than driving in traffic. I'm from New York, Long Island specifically, and the traffic here is truly unbearable. My brother lives in Florida, and I like to go down and visit pretty often. It's a long drive though. Depending on when you leave, it could be upwards of 18 hours. I like to leave New York very early in the morning, like 2 a.m., so that I could be out of all the high traffic areas by the time any cars are on the road. So it was a Thursday morning at 2 a.m. that I was leaving home to get on the road. I stopped for my morning coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, knowing I had a long, grueling drive ahead of me. The reason I was driving and not flying was because I was going to be down there for a whole month, and I didn't want to rely on my brother to take me everywhere I needed to go. By the time I was off of Long Island, it was after 3 a.m. It was smooth sailing from Jersey. The drive from New York to Florida is very easy once you're out of New York. You take the I-95 all the way down. At about 4 a.m., the hunger was starting to set in, and so I pulled off the I-95 at the first sight of a food sign. I saw Wendy's on the sign, and so I figured I'd get breakfast from there. I skipped breakfast at the house because waking up so early, I feel like your brain doesn't have a chance to realize how hungry you are for a few hours. At least that's me personally. I followed the signs to the Wendy's. I was in some random spot in Jersey. There were no streetlights here. I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. Just about the only light was from my headlights. When I got to the Wendy's parking lot, some of the lights were on, and I saw a car in the parking lot, so I pulled into the drive-thru. The menu in the drive-thru was lit up, so I thought it was open, but I sat there for over a minute looking at the intercom, waiting for someone to greet me, but they didn't. I even said "excuse me" to no avail. I pulled out my phone and looked up this Wendy's, and wouldn't you know it, it didn't open until 6 a.m. And then, suddenly, 3 knocks at my window almost sent me out of my seat. I turned to my right, and there was a man outside my window, smiling. He motioned for me to lower the window. I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, so I just cracked it open just enough to hear him. He said the place isn't open, and I said, yeah, I actually just found that out. He then told me that he was stranded. He pointed to the one other car in the parking lot over there, and said his battery died. He practically begged me to come help him jumpstart his car. I told him I don't have jumper cables, and he told me not to worry, he has them in his trunk. I took one more look at his car parked in the corner spot by the woods, and I said okay. I believe in karma, and I knew I'd have bad karma if I left this man stranded in a situation that I could have easily helped him out in. He backed away from the car so I could pull my car next to his. Since he was parked head in, I did the same to align our hoods as close as possible. I got out from my car after popping my hood. He went to go pop his hood and grab his jumper cables. After we connected the cables to the respective terminals, I started my car again. We gave it a minute before I told him he should go try starting his car. He took his sweet time walking inside, but when he tried starting it, the car didn't start. So we gave it another couple of minutes, and then he tried it again. Still nothing. This was weird considering he had just been driving the car, so his battery shouldn't need that long to get enough of a charge to start again. The guy then asked me to hang on as he walked away and got on his phone. He started speaking in Spanish in a pretty low volume. I can't really understand Spanish, so I wasn't even bothering trying to hear what he was saying. He came back to me after his call and said that his friend said to give it a few more minutes and try one more time. I said okay. I was trying to do the right thing, but I was also hoping this wasn't going to eat up much more of my time. But the last thing I was expecting was hearing the aggressive sound of 2 pickup truck engines flooring it into the parking lot, one from either side of the building. I instantly put it together. I said oh shit under my breath as I removed the jumper cables from my battery and shut the hood in a hurry, but it was too late. The 2 trucks pulled up behind my car, trapping me in. I had to think on my feet. I looked at the man, who was still smiling at me, but now the smile looked and felt much more nefarious and evil. The look he gave me was so unsettling, and it's engraved into my memory. I locked my car with my key fob and darted into the woods. I ran in the dark, cutting up my shins and God knows what. I tripped over something on the ground, and at that point, I took that as the time to lay down and make myself as tiny as possible. I heard a few men yelling in Spanish somewhere in the woods. I was so scared for my life as the voices got closer. I don't think it gets any more tense than what I was experiencing in that moment. I didn't know how many there were, I didn't know if they were armed, but I heard at least 3 voices. And then the voices started fading away back into the distance, and I felt a sense of relief, until the sound of my car alarm going off in the distance. All of my stuff was packed in the back of my car. Hundreds of dollars worth of clothes, shoes, watches, bracelets. I started making my way back to the parking lot, crouching down. By the time I got close enough to look into the lot, I could see it was just my car there. All 3 other vehicles were gone. I ran out to my car, and it was anyone's worst nightmare. My rear window was shattered, and all of my stuff was gone. Basically 80% of my entire wardrobe, just stolen. My suitcase in the trunk, and all the bags in the back seats. Everything. I actually started to shed tears out of pure stress. I called the police and explained everything. The officers on scene told me they would have to get the CCTV footage from the Wendy's when they opened. After taking all of my info, I was told I didn't need to stay in town and they would be in touch. I was about 2 hours from home. I turned around and drove home. It was the most stressful, depressing, and defeated drive of my life. To make matters worse, I was contacted by the police department in Jersey, and they told me the vehicle in the Wendy's lot had a fake license plate, and the 2 pickup trucks didn't have plates. He told me they were still going to do what they can, but I knew that was just him trying to give me a sense of hope. My stuff was never found. Those bastards got away with it. Like I said, I believe in karma, and I hope those pieces of filth got what was coming to them. We've all taken a long car trip, haven't we? We've all passed that rest area sign multiple times, wondering if we could make it another 20 minutes or not before having to take a pee break or stretch. Sometimes you're lucky and get one of those huge rest areas with the big buildings with food and everything. But most other times, depending on where you are, you'll be lucky to get a little one with a tiny building just for restrooms and nothing else. Well, I was on a long road trip. A 15-hour road trip actually, and a big chunk of that drive was overnight. I won't say from where to where because I don't really think that matters much, but I will say that I was in some bumfucky area on the east coast of the US. It was late at night and I was powering through the drive. Not many cars on the road at this hour. In fact, it was a pretty rare scene to see another car on the road this late.
I was reaching that uncomfortable point in the ride where I had to use the bathroom, and I was just getting overall antsy in my seat from sitting for so long. I started keeping an eye out for a rest area sign, and when I saw that familiar blue sign, it felt like a saving grace. So a few miles later, I veered off into the rest area. It was a small one, but there was a restroom building, and that's all I needed. There were no trucks parked here. I'm pretty sure they can only stay overnight at designated truck rest areas. But there was another car in the parking lot. I considered the possibility that whoever it was asleep in their car. As I got out from my car, I stretched a bit, and on my way to the bathroom, I looked at the other car in the lot. But the windows appeared to be tinted, so I couldn't see if someone was inside of it or not. Not that it was a big deal in the moment, I was just curious. I got inside the bathroom, and I was faced with a strange sight. There was a man standing in the corner of the bathroom with his head looking down and his back towards me. At first I thought he was using the urinal, but I quickly realized he wasn't even facing the closest urinal. He was literally just facing the corner of the wall. I paused, and I didn't know whether to say something or not. I almost said, "Are you alright?" but the scene was just too weird. I had to walk closer to him though to get to the stall, and honestly, I was almost scared to get near him. I just tried to mind my business and keep a normal pace. I walked into the stall and closed the door. Honestly though, I couldn't go to the bathroom with someone else in the room. I'm one of those people. It was just too dead silent in there. It was weird. I stood in the stall for like a minute trying to at least pee, but I couldn't for some reason. I flushed the toilet anyway and left the stall. But now, the man had turned around. He was still standing in the same spot, but now he was facing me. I could see his face, and he was looking at me. I'm not one to ever judge someone's appearance, but this man was the scariest looking man I'd ever seen. There was something so unsettling about his face, specifically his eye region. The expression he had was a blank stare. I hadn't had a social interaction in over 10 hours, and this caught me way off guard. Instead of saying anything, I quickly turned and headed out of the bathroom. I got to my car and wasted no time turning it on and backing it up. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that man walking in the direction of my car. I drove fast away to get him out of my sight. I was relieved to get back on the highway. However, that was the only relief I got. I still had to use the bathroom. I was sure it would only be another 20 minutes or so till the next one. I could hold it. I was right, it was about 20 minutes before I got to the next rest area. It was another nearly identical one as the other. Like I said earlier, most are pretty similar. No cars were in this one, thank God. I pulled into a spot right in front of the bathroom and hurried to the stall, and let's just say I felt a lot better very quickly. As I was finishing up in the stall, I heard footsteps enter the room. I thought they'd stop at one of the urinals, but the footsteps came straight to the stall and stopped. I saw someone's shoes through the bottom crack of the door. They were literally standing on the other side of the stall. My first thought was that it was that guy from the other bathroom. He followed me. My social anxiety was handicapping me from saying anything initially, until I finally mustered up the courage to say, "Someone's in here." No response to this though. Now I knew I was in trouble. The only thing I could do was dial 911, put it on speaker so that the man could hear the operator say, "911, what's your emergency?" I said loud and clear, "I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened." As the operator asked my location and details, I answered everything in a loud voice, in a tone suggesting that I was implying a "f*** you" to the man. Thank God this worked, as the person turned and walked out of the bathroom. I told this to the operator, but said I still would feel safer waiting in here until police came, and that's what I did. A knock at the bathroom door from a police officer was my cue to safely come out. I described the man and the vehicle I saw at the other rest area, the creepy encounter, and then the second creepy encounter at this one. We checked my car as well to make sure it wasn't messed with at all. After determining that he was gone, the officer and I left the rest area at the same time, and eventually he turned off the highway. The rest of my road trip went normal, but damn was this a terrifying night. I'd never been followed before. I know with almost 100% certainty that the person outside of the stall was the same creep that was in the first bathroom. It just feels extra weird because I'm a male.
These things I feel like usually seem to happen to women, but I guess it can really happen to anyone.
My name is Samantha. I'm 20 years old and I work at a Walmart by a small town called Jackson in Alabama. Since I don't go to school full time, my boss would oftentimes put me on an overnight shift, back when the store was open 24 hours a day. Given that it was a supercenter, there would still be a number of employees working. My shift this one particular night was 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was one of only a couple employees doing stock work, and there was 1 or 2 employees at registers up front. Given that our store sits in the countryside of Alabama, we didn't really get much business at these insane hours of the night. However, it was a prime restocking period. I didn't personally know the other employees working that night, but it's not like we'd run into each other in the giant store anyway. I started my night folding pants in the men's department and generally tidying up. I kept headphones in at night because usually there would be no one to tell me to take them out. The customer came to the jeans section, and at that time it was around 11:30 p.m., so it wasn't really that weird. People would still come in and close shop till usually around midnight. The customer came up to me and asked me if we had any more of the specific pants he found in a different waist size. I apologized and told him only whatever was on the rack. He thanked me and walked away. I made accidental eye contact with him as soon as he stood by the rack putting the jeans back. It was kind of awkward. He walked away and I continued with my work. Some time passed and the store started to look like a ghost town. No one to be seen as far as the eye could see. I think it was like 1 a.m. I had made my way over to the appliances section. I was doing a lot of back and forth work with boxes from the back section where we kept all the items that were yet to go out. I brought a wagon full of boxes to one of the aisles and started stocking the shelves. Because the shelves were empty though, I was able to see someone through the next aisle over, and they were watching me. Well, only up until he noticed me notice him. Then he looked away. But his eyes looked really familiar. I stepped closer to get a better view, and I realized it was the same customer from like 2 hours earlier. How in the world could he still be in the store? Without making it obvious, I took the wagon with me and passed the next aisle over just to get a look and see if the man had any items in his hands. His hands were completely empty. No way could he be shopping for 2 hours and not pick up a single thing. Something wasn't right. I quickly finished up restocking the shelf with coffee machines and other appliances, then brought the empty wagon to the back area. I chilled out in there for a while because, quite frankly, I felt like that guy might have been following or watching me longer than I realized. I played on my phone for a little while in the employee lounge. Then when I figured it was time to get back to work, I decided I would do grocery work instead, just to be in a different part of the store. I went into the dairy cooler and filled a bunch of crates with dairy products like milk and yogurts. This took a lot of time to do because I had to check the dates on the products and such. Over the loud sound of the giant refrigerators keeping the cooler cold, I heard the door to the dairy cooler burst open. There was conveniently a gap in the boxes sitting on one of the pallets that allowed me to peek through it to the door of the cooler. And I shit you not, it was that same customer. I ran to cover under one of the shelves and pushed a big box full of eggs in front of me. I didn't have to worry about making noise because the refrigerators were so loud. For anyone wondering why I decided to hide, well, I already assumed this guy was hanging around the store watching me. Seeing him in the employees only section, never mind that, coming into the dairy cooler, seemingly something bad was definitely about to go down. I hid behind that box with my head down for the longest time, expecting to hear the doors to the cooler open and close eventually. After a while of hiding and not looking, I assumed maybe he left after looking for me. I lifted my head from my arms for the first time and looked up in front of the box and screamed. He was right there, smiling at me, standing over the box. But his smile vanished as soon as I started to scream. He tried putting his hand on my lips to muffle my scream, but I didn't allow that to go any further. I pushed the box of eggs over, right into him, and the eggs falling to the floor made him step back, looking down at his shoes. I ran right past him, but he didn't grab me, so I continued to run till I found another stock worker and told him to help me. The employee's name was Bob, I remember from his name tag. Suddenly, the man from the dairy cooler came up to the two of us and apologized, explaining that he was from corporate and was coming to make sure everything was running smoothly. He said he didn't mean to scare me and was simply checking up on me in the dairy cooler to make sure I wasn't slacking off. This Bob guy seemed to believe it all, but then again, he didn't seem very smart at all. I asked the man why he put his hand on my mouth, and he said he was trying to avoid making a scene. Then, shockingly, he gave me the order to finish up the appliance section, and he disappeared. As he was speed walking away down the aisle, I called out, "What's your name?" And he called back, "Tom." And just like that, he was gone. The next day, I called one of the managers and asked if there was supposed to be a visit from corporate the night before, and if a creepy man named Tom sounded familiar. My manager, Margaret, said it sounded like complete bullshit. There was no record of anyone from corporate named Tom who was supposed to come visit, nor would anyone from corporate ever be in the store at 2 a.m. They then went ahead and checked the camera footage, and a police report was filed when they realized this was a random man, and the cameras proved this man had been stalking me between the aisles for the better part of the first few hours of my shift. I told Margaret I couldn't do night shifts anymore after that, and she understood. I still work there, but more so as a day stock person or a cashier. What's one place you can go to and find the weirdest, freakiest creatures in our society? I swear I've never been to a single Walmart where I didn't see at least one eye-catchingly strange human being. Strange does not even cut it for what I'm about to tell you. It was the Thursday before Black Friday. My Walmart was open extra late. I was in there around 11 o'clock looking for a new laptop, and by chance I picked up off the shelf the last one that was being promoted for a really good Black Friday deal. As I grabbed it though, some big, revolting, dirty-looking guy comes up to me and insists he needs a laptop very badly. I nervously said I'm sorry, it's the last one. Then he got angry at me and started making a bit of a scene. The man clearly wasn't normal, and my heart started racing simply because I don't get put on guard in these kinds of situations a lot. As others looked on at the commotion this big guy was making, I walked away with the laptop box quickly and went straight to a line. He kept yelling at me as I walked away. It was unbelievable. Some other customers on the line even tried to laugh with me and make me feel better, saying the guy was a nut. So I get home. My family's all asleep already. I go outside to sit in the yard by the pool and set up my new laptop. Then the light on the side of the house turned on. The one that turns on due to movement. I went to check the side of the house to make sure no one was there. Would that thing go off once in a while? Yeah, but there's a small patch of woods right next to the house, so animals would often run on the property, triggering it. Either way, I'm kind of a big pussy, so I went inside, locked the door, and finished setting up my laptop in the living room. A car alarm suddenly started going off outside. I recognized it to be my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm this. I ran to get my keys upstairs, then tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from the inside, so I stepped out to the porch and clicked it off. But then I noticed a car parked in front of our house that wasn't there earlier when I got home, and any cars parked in the street on our block was suspicious enough. We live in a closed-off community, and everyone has huge driveways. I stepped down from the stoop and realized there was someone sitting in that car. I went back inside and locked the door. I went to my mom's room and told her I think someone outside means us harm. My mom and dad have a complicated situation, so my dad doesn't always stay with us. It would have been a different story having my dad there to tell about this. My mom came downstairs with me, noticeably worried based on what I told her. My mom took a look through the peephole in the front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through it as well and felt ready to throw up when I saw a huge man standing on the other side of the door on our stoop. I whispered to my mom, I think that man followed me from Walmart. Suddenly, the doorknob started to turn as the man tried opening the door. When it didn't work, he started pounding on the door. That's when my mom let out a gasp and cry, and my younger sister came out from her room, who also started to panic when becoming wise to the situation. The pounding stopped. Then there was a silence for a while, other than my mom's voice on the phone with the police. A few minutes went by, my mom still on the line with 911 with police en route, and there was a loud bang and crash downstairs in the den. A window was shattered. My mom and sister both screamed and cried. I told them to run upstairs while I locked the door to the den. I waited down there, expecting an attempt at the door or a bang. Nothing. Surprisingly, I heard a police car briefly wail its siren outside my house. It was the quickest response time I'd ever heard of. I ran outside to lead them to the den where the broken glass was. There, they found the huge, dirty, crazy-looking man hiding behind one of our couches. He was arrested at once, and we pressed charges. All the while, he was screaming profanities and threats at me, not helping his case. Both cops told me the guy seemed unstable and on some kind of drugs, but told us to get a good night's rest because he wouldn't be bothering us again. So while it may be fun to people watch at Walmart and laugh at some of the goofy things you see, realize you may also find some of the more dangerous people in our society in your local Walmart. Working the night shift at Walmart as a night stock person on the weekends was my second job when I was finishing up college. I needed to pay off my loans, so I had to make money however possible. I didn't deal with customers or anything. I would just sign for night deliveries, do warehouse work, and stock shelves in the store during after hours. The typical shift would usually be either 11 to 7 or 12 to 7. On July 9th, 2015, a Thursday night, I still have it locked into my brain. I was midway through my shift in the electronics department when I saw in the corner of my eye someone walk past the aisle I was working in. This wouldn't usually catch my attention if it weren't for the fact that there were only 2 other workers in the building with me that night, Alvin and Baco. They were both wearing the same staff shirts I was wearing. I would know because we all clocked in at the same time. The person I saw in the corner of my eye was wearing all black, so I naturally walked to the end of the aisle and did a little peep around the shelf. No one was there. I yelled both Alvin and Baco's names, so when they didn't answer, it made it even stranger. But regardless, I went back to work. I was holding in a pee for a while, and I told myself I'd go when I finished work in that aisle. Seconds later, there was a huge crash a few aisles down. It actually startled me. I ran over to see what it was, and a bicycle was somehow knocked off its hook. The hook was still fine and in place. It seemed like someone would have had to put effort into knocking this down. I hung it back up and started walking around the aisles, suspicious as hell. I got to the last aisle towards the back of the store, which was the paper and cleaning aisle. Then there was this freaky-ass sound that I could best describe as a laugh. It sounded like it came from literally the next aisle over. So once again, I did a short run back to that aisle and felt my heart drop when I saw a man dressed in all black, waiting by the end of the aisle with his back facing me, but his head turned so that all I saw was only half his face. Then he suddenly ran, not towards me, but down some other aisle. I heard his footsteps running around. I was faced with a choice of chasing after him or going to find my 2 co-workers, and I chose the latter. All the while, I heard these freakish laughing sounds and footsteps that I honestly felt like were circling me. I found Alvin in the women's department and told him to be on the lookout for someone who wasn't meant to be in the building dressed in all black. We didn't have walkie-talkies, so I asked him to tell Baco if he ran into him. I excused myself because I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to go to the bathroom. I ran to the employees-only bathroom, which was in the warehouse section. I put a nest of toilet paper on the seat in one of the stalls and sat down. And yes, I'm the kind of person to sit when I pee. The door to the bathroom opened and closed. Naturally, with 3 to 4 people in the building, I said, "Who is that?" And with no answer, I assumed the worst. I heard that horrific laughing again, and someone stepped into view from between the crack in the door. Looking right in, they stepped closer until the crack was completely covered, and all I saw of their face was an eye. Then the whispering began. Unintelligible whispering, but the echo from the bathroom just made it more unsettling. I just remembered I had Alvin's phone number saved on my phone, so I got it out and called him at once. I was very loud with what I was saying, telling Alvin to get to the bathroom at once and help me. I stayed on the line with him and watched as the man on the other side of the stall laughed one more time, then ran out of the bathroom. I told Alvin to hurry, and 20 to 30 seconds later, Alvin entered the bathroom. He said he didn't see anyone on his way there. We didn't have any security guys working when the store was closed, so we couldn't even go look at the cameras. I stayed by Alvin the rest of the night, helping in whatever sections he was working in, because safety in numbers. I texted my boss that night, and when I woke up at 3 p.m. the next day, I read his response. He said all the camera screens returned static footage from the night before. Nobody went and turned them off as far as he knew. I got chills reading his texts. He believed my story and assumed it was related to the cameras, but with no video proof of a breaking and entering or trespassing, I don't think there was anything he could do. It was all above my pay grade, though. That was the only night shift I've ever had where something truly unexplainable happened. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring, half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed, only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I'd try to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find, maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been, but there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the 4th time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close, but having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it, but one random night I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move, complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it.
I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window, and just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier. If it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Most nights I fall asleep to some form of sound. It's the best way I know how to knock out quickly. Sometimes it's a chess video, sometimes it's a podcast about space, sometimes it's just a recording of a thunderstorm. You get the idea. I'm a very active dreamer, so whatever I fall asleep to usually gets translated directly into my dreams in some form. For example, if I fall asleep to a soccer compilation, then it's likely I'll have a dream about playing soccer. Part of the reason this is so clutch is because I had a ton of nightmares growing up, and this technique prevents them. This happened a couple of weeks ago during a sleepover at my friend Duncan's place. It was a sleepover, so I had to fall asleep normally. That wasn't an issue for me. It just meant my dreams would be a lot less predictable. There were 3 of us, me, Duncan, and Ian. Duncan's parents were away for the weekend, which is why we were having the sleepover in the first place. He has a lot of big, comfy couches in his living room, so that's where we all slept. That night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've had in a while. I was out at sea on a small sailboat. I don't even know where it came from. I've never been on a sailboat in my life. The water was super choppy, and I remember the sky being this weird mix of dark purple and gray. The wind was howling, but not in a scary way. It kind of felt like I was in a movie or something. Then the boat lurched. I couldn't see what we hit, but I definitely felt it. Whatever it was, it knocked the whole sail sideways and cracked something underneath. Water started gushing in through the bottom, and I remember trying to plug the hole with my jacket, which obviously wasn't doing anything. I started panicking, like full-on helpless panic, and just as the boat started to sink, a dolphin jumped out of the water, locked eyes with me, and said in perfect English, "Wake up." That instantly snapped me awake. I'm usually pretty groggy after waking up, but this was different, although I didn't know why yet. I looked around the room, trying to figure out if anything was different or strange, but everything looked normal. My friends were sleeping next to me, and the living room was exactly how we left it. You know that weird in-between phase right after you wake up where you can't really process information accurately? That's what I was experiencing. A few seconds later, though, my brain started functioning properly, and I picked up on a sound that was definitely out of place. There was this distinct rushing sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't muffled like you'd expect if a faucet was just dripping. It was consistent, like a hose or something. That must have been why I had that wonky dream about the ocean. I sat there for a second, trying to figure out what I was hearing. Then, like an idiot, I got up to check it out myself. I crept up the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. The noise got louder with each step. It was definitely running water, and it was coming from the upstairs bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly cracked open, and even from a distance I could see the sink. One of the knobs was turned all the way to the right. The water was just gushing out, full blast. There was no way that could have happened on its own. It didn't even make sense. I got close to the doorway and was about to step in, but something made me stop. The bathroom up there is pretty big. It's got this long counter and a bathtub with a curtain, plus this awkward corner where the toilet is. Plenty of blind spots. For all I knew, someone could have been crouching behind the tub or standing right behind the door. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but I just couldn't go in. I backed up and booked it down the stairs to wake up Duncan. I shook him hard and told him something was wrong. At first, he was groggy, but the urgency in my voice must have gotten through, because he sat up and asked what was going on. I told him the sink upstairs was blasting and I thought someone was in the house. That woke him up real fast. We left Ian asleep on the couch and crept back up together. When we got to the bathroom door, Duncan didn't even hesitate. He pushed it open and stepped inside. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Almost immediately, a figure lunged from around the corner and tackled Duncan from the side. It happened so fast. All I saw was Duncan go down and this guy swinging a piece of PVC pipe like he was about to beat the crap out of him. I didn't think, I just threw myself at the guy, trying to get him off Duncan. We both piled on him and wrestled him to the floor, but he was bigger than both of us. It was pure chaos. Eventually, the guy broke free and bailed, shoving both of us to the side and sprinting for the stairs. By the time Duncan and I made it to the porch, he was gone. The police showed up maybe 30 minutes later, but they weren't much help. They determined that the entry point was a downstairs window, which was wide open and had been previously unlocked. Duncan's family doesn't have cameras in their house, so there was no evidence we could turn over. The police said that it was likely that it had just been a burglar committing a random attack, but my friends and I think it was way more specific than that. First of all, why would a burglar purposely make noise by turning on a sink faucet in the first place? Yeah, it was obviously a trap to lure someone upstairs, but what was the point if he was trying to rob the place? This makes me think he had a more sinister intention, one I can't fully explain. Duncan is convinced that whoever broke in knew his parents were out of town and had expected only one person to be there that night: him. If that's true, then I can only imagine that whoever had broken in intended on seriously injuring or killing Duncan. I don't even like to think about what would have happened had I gone in that upstairs bathroom by myself.
This happened on a Friday night a couple months back. My girlfriend's parents had planned a weekend trip out of town, some kind of anniversary thing, I think. So naturally, my girlfriend Bonnie invited me to stay at her place. Normally, her parents are pretty strict, and sleeping over in her room is definitely off limits, but since they'd be gone the whole weekend, we figured it wouldn't hurt anyone. Bonnie lives in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every house looks the same, quiet enough that by 10 o'clock it always feels deserted. Honestly, that place creeps me out a little whenever I leave late at night, so I was relieved at the thought of just staying put for once. I showed up around 8, brought snacks, and we watched a movie. The usual stuff. Bonnie's room is on the second floor facing the backyard, and from her window, you can just barely see into the dense line of trees that borders their property. They don't have much exterior lighting, so at night it's pitch black out there, like looking straight into a void. Bonnie has a queen-size bed, so we both had plenty of space, enough that we could stretch comfortably without crowding each other. I'll skip the rest of the irrelevant stuff. We eventually turned off the TV around midnight and drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep, but I vividly remember the unsettling dream that followed. Now, before I tell you about it, I want to say one thing. I've only had a false awakening dream a couple of times in my life before. This night was one of them. For anyone who's never had one, it's a really strange and almost transcendent experience. Dreams like the one I'm about to describe are actually the main reason I believe there are things in this world beyond those that we can see. In the dream, I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere downstairs. Before I could even process it, rapid footsteps started racing up the stairs. Without hesitation, I shot up in the bed with the intention of intercepting whoever had broken in. But something stopped me. Bonnie's room looked identical to how it had looked when we went to sleep. Every detail exactly as it should have been, except for one thing that I could still picture in my mind's eye even now. A thin yellow glow spilling into the bedroom from the crack beneath the bedroom door. It was just a sliver of light, but for some reason, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. All my confidence was gone. My vision began tunneling into this little bar of light as everything else started fading to black. The footsteps made it up the stairs and started storming towards the door, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was frozen. And then, silence. I was still fixated on the light below the door when the voices started. At first, it was just one voice, a woman's voice, saying all sorts of nasty things about me. Insults about my appearance, my outlook on life, my future. But then things started getting more personal. It knew things about me, deeply personal things I'd never shared with anyone, not even Bonnie. It started reciting events from my past, things I had said, things I had done, things no stranger would know, things no stranger could know. One voice became two became three, and before I knew it, there were 100 voices tormenting me with my darkest, most repressed secrets. It genuinely felt like the darkest pieces of my brain were being dragged out of my head and thrown under a microscope. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, bolted across the room, and swung open the bedroom door, ready to confront whoever was harassing me. But the instant the door opened, every light in the house snapped off, and I was plunged into pure darkness. The voices stopped, and the air turned ice cold, sharp enough to sting my skin, and for a split second, it felt like I'd stepped into another world entirely. I stumbled backwards in a disoriented haze until I found the bed, then scrambled under the covers like I was 6 years old again. And then I woke up. Only I was still dreaming at that point. I just didn't know it. I sat up slowly, obviously still scared, but trying to reassure myself that the nightmare was over. But to my horror, when I looked at the bedroom door, I saw that same beam of light pouring into the room. And then I heard it. The downstairs door slamming shut again, followed by those same frantic footsteps stomping up the stairs. The entire sequence replayed itself with agonizing precision. The footsteps stopping at the door, the voices, the secrets, the whole thing. I couldn't help myself. I again ran towards the door and threw it open, only to experience that same cold darkness as before. When I finally woke up for real, my heart was racing. I was 75% sure I had actually woken up, but I was so disoriented from the strangeness of that double false awakening dream that I couldn't be sure. Bonnie was sound asleep next to me, completely unaware of what I had just been through. That's when I knew I was awake for real. In my dream, I hadn't even thought to look over at the other side of the bed. I started to relax, but when I sat up to look at the bedroom door, I damn near screamed. There, under the door, was that same strip of light that I had seen in my dreams. It was the exact same image. It did make sense. Bonnie and I were alone, and every single light in the house was supposed to be off. For a second, I just stared, unsure of what to make of what I was seeing. But then I heard footsteps downstairs, clear as day. Someone was inside the house. Right away, I knew we were being robbed. Without another thought, I pulled out my phone and discreetly called the police. After telling them what was happening, I tiptoed over to the door just to make sure it was locked. Then, I crept back to Bonnie and gently woke her up, putting my hand over her mouth so she wouldn't accidentally make a noise. She didn't scream or anything when I told her, which was a huge relief. It felt like forever, but after a few tense minutes, the police arrived at the house. Things got loud downstairs. The police actually kicked in the front door, and there was a bunch of shouting. When I felt like it was safe to do so, I went downstairs just in time to see two masked men being ushered into a police car in cuffs. I talked to the officers for a bit and thanked them before going back upstairs. It was late, but Bonnie's parents rushed back from their trip early once they heard what had happened. They weren't even mad that I had stayed the night. After hearing my story, they were actually grateful. About a week after that, Bonnie called me with more information. The officers told her parents that the two men who had been arrested admitted to breaking in because they'd seen a Facebook post about their trip and didn't think anyone would be home. As odd as it sounds, thinking about the actual break-in doesn't bother me all that much. The reason I can't get this experience out of my head is because of that damn dream. I can accept that the noise of the break-ins made its way into my head somehow. That part's fine. But what I don't understand is the actual content of the dream. Bonnie thinks I have some unresolved demons lurking somewhere in my subconscious, but I don't like thinking about that possibility. And as for the door, I was lying down, so I wouldn't have been able to even see the door, let alone conjure up a perfect image of it in my head. I really don't know what to make of that, but that strip of light is something I see all the time. I can literally see it in my head now. I don't even have to be closing my eyes, which is even more troubling. It's not like it's obstructing my vision or anything, but it's always there in the back of my mind. I'm sure that image will go away eventually, but part of me is worried that it'll be seared into my head forever.
My cousin Tyler and I used to have sleepovers all the time when we were kids. Always at his house though, because he had the cool house. Back then, before cell phones and modern video games, kids actually used to do normal kid things, like for example, we both loved to play hide and seek at night. One time when we were 9, both our parents were going out for a night in Atlantic City, so they had my other cousin, Tyler's older brother Joe, keep watch on us. An hour into the night, however, Joe told both of us he was going out and not to tell Mom. Tyler and Joe would commonly do this because it mutually benefited them. Tyler loved having the house to himself and Joe hated staying home all night. By the time he left, it was already a little later in the night, like 9 o'clock. We had our dinners and decided it would be a good idea to play hide and seek. Their house was honestly massive, so it was always a lot of fun. I was hiding first. We started in the basement where Tyler would count. We had a rule that we couldn't use any house lights, only flashlights. Our reason for this was because it just made it cooler. I tiptoed up the stairs, then up the next flight of stairs to the upstairs of the house. The upstairs had a whole other living area, along with 3 bedrooms. I chose to hide in one of the unused bedrooms. I buried myself between two big beanbag chairs and a blanket. I left the door open to avoid any suspicions. I heard creaking coming into the room, lively footsteps. Tyler was now moving around the carpeted room. I could hear him. He went over to the closet and opened it. Then he opened the second closet. Silence. Then he walked over to the other side of the room, and he started opening the drawers to the desk, rummaging through them. Suddenly I heard Tyler's young, innocent voice calling my name up the stairs in a kind of mockingly tone to try and scare me. My mouth opened and literally started twitching when I put two and two together. I lifted the blanket slightly over my head to see what he was doing, but it wasn't Tyler. I knew right away based off the person's height. It was a much taller, fully grown man. It wasn't Joe, and it wasn't his dad. He perked up like a statue when he heard Tyler's voice, and I saw him duck into the corner of the room, behind the small piece of wall that sticks out there. Tyler entered the room with his flashlight and kept saying my name over and over, slow and drawn out like. I was praying his light would not reach over to the corner of the room. His light landed on me under the blanket. He may not have even seen me, but I still willingly came out and acted all defeated, fake laughing and everything. I told him he won, put my arm around his back, and started nudging him out of the room. I kept the conversation as natural as possible, until we were halfway down the stairs. That's when I dropped the bomb and told him there was someone in there with me and nudged him to run outside. Being the scared 9-year-olds we were, all we could do was run next door and ask the woman living there to call the police for us. She did without hesitation. I still remember the scene vividly, of the cops pulling up, running into the house, and 5 minutes later ushering a guy out in cuffs. It was a great feeling, even as a 9-year-old. One time I had a sleepover with my friend Mike on a cloudy, dark night. There was a slight drizzle and occasional lightning. We were 13 years old. Mike lived on a dead end with one other house next to it. Across the street was a field surrounded by trees, and his backyard led to a forest. Mike and I were up late, much after his dad went to sleep. His dad's room was all the way upstairs. Mike's room was on the lower level of the house by the den, so the den was where we would hang out mostly to just play GameCube. A knock at the backyard window interrupted our game. The blind was shut, so we couldn't see outside. Mike ran to go open the blind. I told him not to, but he did anyway. As he did, I shut off the TV and lamps because I didn't want to be seen. Now that it was dark in the den and slightly brighter outside, we could slightly see outside and see that there was nothing but grass in the visible distance. A small flash of lightning confirmed that there was nothing but wet grass in all directions. We sat in the den with the lights off for a while, just waiting for something else to happen. We kept our eyes on the window, expecting somebody to come up to it. Eventually, after what felt like forever later, we turned the TV and lamp back on and pretended it didn't happen. The blinds were open this time, and every so often I'd take nervous glances at the window, just making sure nobody was out there. After getting so absorbed in the game and forgetting to take a glance at the window, there was the second set of knocks. Mike and I both jumped up and looked at each other. With all the lights on, we couldn't really see outside. At least, not until the flash of lightning outside, just for a brief moment, lit up the night sky, long enough to show the person who was standing at the window. This time we ran upstairs to Mike's dad's room and pulled him out of bed, screaming at him to get up. The three of us ran out to the backyard in our coats and shoes, turning the backyard light on the way and also taking along flashlights. There was a buildup of mud next to the back wall of the house where the dirt patches were, and in the puddles of mud were heavy, distinct footprints of boots. We followed the footprints as far as we could, but as the mud faded away, so did the footprints. We searched high and low for anybody. We even went around front and then out into the woods. There was nobody. We all went to sleep. Mike and I in the den. I couldn't sleep though, I was terrified. Of course, the blinds were shut to the window and back door now. Just as I was anticipating it, there was a third set of knocks at exactly 12:15. I remember that number. Me and Mike both jumped from the couches and ran upstairs to his dad's room once again. This time he ran outside alone and told us to call the cops. He returned soaking wet, having found nobody. The cops came for nothing because there was really nothing they could do. The knocking didn't happen again though, and I also never slept over Mike's house again. Ever since that day, his den just always gave me the creeps. I used to be close friends with a kid named Chris. He moved away across the state when I was 8. Since we never got to see each other anymore, I got my mom to agree to drive me all the way over to Chris's new house in the country for a weekend sleepover. Pulling onto his property, I already knew this was the perfect place to do anything outdoorsy. It was a decent-sized house with nothing but woods in all directions. The first day we didn't do much because I got there late anyway, so we just talked for a while and watched a movie. A couple of times I'd think that I was hearing sounds coming from below the floor. I would ask him, "Do you have a basement? Is someone down there?" Chris went on to tell me that there was no basement and that his whole family had been hearing weird noises coming from down there for a few days, and they planned on having some inspector over to check it out. The next day was partly cloudy and warm, so we planned on spending most of the day outside. I convinced him to go for a walk in the woods just to explore. After all, this was all kind of new to him as well. Conveniently, there was an opening into the woods that almost seemed to have meant to be a path. So as we were walking over to it, Chris's foot hit something that made a metallic kind of thud sound. His foot hit a rusty old cellar door. He said he didn't know about this, neither did his dad. He bent down and pulled it open, and it made an ear-piercing squeal as the rusty door turned on the hinges. It was the definition of pitch black down there, but it seemed a ladder led down a very narrow tunnel. Neither of us dared to step foot down there. Suddenly, a sound echoed up the tunnel, like the sound of something dropping onto a hard floor. And then metallic sounds echoing up the tunnel, getting closer. As soon as we realized it was the sound of somebody climbing up the ladder, we ran to get Chris's father, who was shocked to see what we had found. He called down there repeatedly for anybody to come out before calling a few of his buddies over to go down with him. Chris and I were forced to stay inside while the three of them went down there. They came back up 5 minutes later, all of them visibly shaken and nervous. They came back inside and talked to Chris's mom in private. They never let either of us in on what they saw. Apparently cops showed up as well, but we were forced to stay in Chris's room, so we couldn't watch any of it. In fact, it wasn't until I was 13 did Chris finally text me one day, telling me what his dad really found down there. 3 full body bags tucked away in a corner, an old cot, broken beer bottles everywhere, and the smell of freshly smoked pot. Chris told me that when we heard something down there, we probably heard whoever was living down there, and whoever was responsible for those dead bodies.
Aren't you tired of hoping the right candidates see your job posts and apply? It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
So to start, my family history is very tragic. My parents got into a serious car accident when I was a little kid, and my dad passed away in the hospital from his injuries. My mom had lasting injuries that still affect her, making it difficult for her to walk. My dad left us the house that my mom and I continued to live in for many years to come. Eventually, my mom started seeing someone when I was around 10, so she'd be out of the house quite often. My uncle Steve would often stay at the house for days at a time while she was gone, and I got really close with him. He was my babysitter of sorts for a long time. He was always a cool uncle. He'd play catch with me in the yard, he'd take care of our pets, he'd take me to the movies, stuff like that any kid needs. Memories I didn't get to form with my dad, unfortunately.
As the years went on and I got older, my mom got married to her second husband, and my Uncle Steve would come around less and less. By the time I was 16, there was a period where he just didn't come over for months and I didn't hear from him. My mom was comfortable leaving me home alone at this point, so I didn't question it too much, and having the house to myself was always nice as a teenager. My mom would be home a couple nights a week for dinner, but for the most part, she lived with her husband. My mom was always very vague about what happened to my Uncle Steve. I had my suspicions that he was sick or dead, though. It may sound weird that my mom would hide something like that from me, but if you met my mom, you'd get it instantly. Because of what she went through, I think it made her a much more compassionate person that doesn't want to cause any kind of stress or grief toward another person. By the time I turned 18, I was a legal adult and the house was basically mine. My mom would visit occasionally, but she and her husband had already gotten another house together. As an 18-year-old guy having a house to myself, you could imagine that I wasn't complaining. Yes, I'd have friends over for late nights, yes, I'd have girls over, and yes, I'd often not pick things up off the floor for days at a time. I would miss my Uncle Steve though, as he was the father figure that I grew up with, and there were times where being in a big empty house by myself at such a young age was kind of lonely and depressing. I would numb this feeling often by, I guess, doing the things I just mentioned, having girls over and late nights with friends. I still had my dog Jojo, the only other life in the house really. He was an Australian shepherd, and at the time of this story, he was 13 years old. He was an old man. He always slept by my side in bed, but one night in January, I remember this because the Christmas tree was still up, I woke up and Jojo wasn't in bed. I got up thinking he was downstairs somewhere and he had to go to the bathroom. I called his name as I walked down the stairs. I didn't hear him, so I walked to the kitchen where the basement stairs and back door were, and I saw him in the dark. He was staring intently down the basement stairs. I usually left that door open because it was a bitch to close. He only moved when he turned his head to look at me for a second, but then he looked right back down the stairs. I stepped to the edge of the stairs and then looked at Jojo and said, "What is it, boy?" His tail started wagging just a bit for a second, then went stiff again. I flicked on the light in the basement and looked down the stairs. Jojo inched closer but didn't bark. I felt a cold shiver run down me as I looked down into the basement. Of all places for your dog to stare down like this, the basement is the worst place. I turned off the light and grabbed Jojo by the collar to bring him upstairs. I shut the door so he couldn't leave again. Was I creeped out? Yes, a little. It was unusual behavior for him. I was mainly asking myself what he could have heard. I tried to go back to sleep. At this point, my mind was kind of racing though, and it didn't help that every few minutes or so, I would hear and feel the vibration on the bed as Jojo would look up at the doorway, as if still hearing something from downstairs. I decided I would investigate. I wasn't going to be a mama's boy and text my mom at whatever off hour in the night it was telling her I'm scared. Part of not having a father figure in the house when you're young is becoming a man early on. I went downstairs again, and by the time I was at the bottom, I heard Jojo walking down following me. Jojo then caught up to me and went straight for the basement door again. Then he stopped in the same position as last time. I stopped alongside him and looked down the stairs to the darkness again. I can't believe I did this, but I called down the stairs, saying, "Is someone there?" I flicked on the light when there was no response. I started walking down the steps, each one creaking beneath me. I hated those old steps. You couldn't see into the basement until you were about halfway down the stairs, as the ceiling was low. I was on maybe the third step when I heard the voice. It was my uncle's voice. I knew it right away, all these years later. It was my uncle's voice from somewhere in the basement, saying my name, only it sounded weak, like he was injured. I ran down to the basement as my heart dropped out of me. I got to the bottom, and it was just an empty basement. "Uncle Steve?" I called out. Jojo was still at the top of the stairs looking down at me. He didn't want to come down. I walked further into the basement, and there was nobody there. My heart was beating 100 beats per minute at this moment. I peeked behind the couch and even behind the TV. There was nowhere else for anyone to be besides the laundry room, which was in the corner. I took one look into the corner, and I thought I heard the slightest sound on the other side of the door. That's when something just came over my entire body, where I had to sprint upstairs like a little kid and get out of there. When I got to the top step, I didn't even shut the light. I struggled to just close the basement door and then run upstairs. Poor old Jojo barked the first barks I'd heard from him in months. He followed behind as fast as he could as I went upstairs. First thing I did was lock us in my room. Then I called my mom over and over until she picked up. When she did, I was whisper screaming into the phone, telling her someone's down in the basement, and it sounded just like Uncle Steve. In fact, I knew it was Uncle Steve. I told her that Jojo was at the basement door when I woke up, after he obviously heard something too. My mom was surprisingly calm and just let me finish. When I finished, I waited for her to say something in panic or anything, but she just said in a gentle, calm voice that I probably just woke up from a bad dream. I doubled down and swore to her that someone was down there. Even Jojo knew it. I asked her if she thought I would just make that up. This is where she paused for a second, and it's because this was the moment she decided to tell me the truth, that my Uncle Steve got sick with cancer and died years ago, and that's why he stopped coming over. Before she could finish her explanation, I told her it's not possible. He's down in the basement right now. She then stopped me and said, "Listen to me. If someone's in the basement, you need to call the cops right now." So that's what I did. I hung up, dialed 911, and told them of a break-in. Jojo and I waited in my bedroom until there was a knock at the front door, followed by the doorbell. I ran downstairs to let them in, and eagerly pointed them to the basement. The basement door was still basically jammed shut like I left it. They told me to wait up there, but I didn't listen. I insisted on going down with them. I reenacted everything as we went down, what I heard, when, and where. Then I showed them where I looked around, and then I pointed to the one spot I didn't check, the laundry room, where I heard the sound. They went to open the door, and I showed them the light switch. When the light turned on, there was no one inside. The laundry room looked how it always looked. There was no one hiding in any secret crevices or behind the machines, nothing. It was as void of people as could be before we came in. I knew I was looking crazy right about now. We went back upstairs, and they did a little search of the first floor as well, then the upstairs. The house was as clear as it could be. There was no one there. They were at least pretty level-headed and not demeaning about it, even though they probably thought I was a whack job. They left, and I went back upstairs to call my mom again. She picked up right away, and this is where she finished explaining. My Uncle Steve died years ago, but she didn't want to tell me because she knew I suffered enough loss, and she couldn't bring herself to tell me. So she just played it off like my uncle kinda disappeared, which I yelled at her was infinitely worse, but that also didn't explain my hearing his voice just now in the basement. I calmed down, and then said into the phone, "Mom, I'm scared." She believed what I heard, I know it, and that scared me even more. She tried to convince me everything would be alright, and that my brain was playing tricks on me. I pretended to agree. We hung up, and I pulled Jojo close to me. He was the only thing keeping me from freaking out of my skin that night. I didn't fall asleep for another few hours. For a whole week after that, life in that house was hell. I couldn't go anywhere near that basement door. Jojo wouldn't stare at it anymore, but it was still haunting. I know it was all real because Jojo was reacting to something. Had Jojo not been there, I could have played it off as a late-night hallucination or mind tricks. But no, someone or something was down there. Something that had my uncle's voice. My mom sold that house just a year later. This happened when I was 24 and renting the upstairs of an old house by myself. It wasn't technically an apartment, it was more like the second floor had been turned into its own little living space years ago. There was a bedroom, bathroom, tiny kitchen, and a living room, and the landlord lived out of state, so I almost never saw him. The first floor was empty and had been for months because he was supposedly renovating it before renting it out again. That part always made me a little uneasy because it meant every night I was sleeping above a completely dark, empty floor of the house. Still, the rent was cheap, and I told myself I was being dramatic. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. Then one night, around 1 in the morning, while I was in bed doom-scrolling, I heard what sounded like a single footstep directly below me. It was so clear that I actually froze and waited for another one. A few seconds later, I heard another. It sounded exactly like someone slowly walking through the first floor living room. I sat up in bed and just listened. I remember thinking maybe it was the house settling, but it didn't sound like that. Old house noises usually had more of a creak or a pop to them. This sounded heavier, like actual weight pressing on floorboards. I stayed still for a long time, then finally convinced myself it had to be nothing. The next day, I checked the first floor on my way out. It was locked. I even opened it and looked inside. The place was empty and dusty, with no furniture except for an old broken table in one room. I felt stupid for being unsettled. The next night, nothing happened. The night after that, it happened again. This time, it started at around 12:30. It was the same thing. Slow footsteps below me. 3 or 4 at a time, then silence, then a few more. It lasted maybe 2 minutes. I muted my TV and stood in the middle of my living room listening down through the floor. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe an animal got in. Maybe pipes somehow sounded like that in this house. But deep down, I knew it sounded like a person moving around. I texted my friend Scott about it, and he made a joke that the downstairs tenant had finally moved in. Over the next week, it kept happening. It was always late at night and always from downstairs. Sometimes it was footsteps, but once it sounded like a cabinet door shutting. That was the first time I got genuinely scared enough to call the landlord. He sounded annoyed more than concerned. He said no one had keys except him and me, and he was out of state. He told me old homes make weird noises, and said if I was really nervous, I could call the police, but he didn't think there was any reason to. That response actually made me more uncomfortable, because now I felt like if something was wrong, I was on my own. One Friday night, I was out later than usual and didn't get home until almost 2. The second I stepped into my upstairs apartment, I felt something was off. I don't know how else to explain it. Nothing looked different, and the lights were off like I'd left them, but something felt different. I stood for a second listening, and everything was quiet, but then directly below me, I heard a thud. It sounded like something had bumped into a wall or a piece of furniture downstairs. I backed up so fast I almost tripped on the rug. I remember just standing there staring at the floor like I could somehow see through it. Then came more footsteps. I left immediately and sat in my car with the doors locked. I actually called the police that time. 2 officers came and checked the whole first floor and outside of the house. They found nothing. One of them said there was no sign of forced entry and no one inside. He was polite about it, but I could tell they both thought I had gotten worked up over house noises. For the next few days, I kept thinking maybe they were right. Then I started noticing little things. Once, I came home from work and the first floor door was open by maybe an inch. I knew I closed it after the police were there. Another time, I smelled cigarette smoke outside the side of the house near one of the downstairs windows. I don't smoke, and neither do any of my nearby neighbors, at least not from what I knew. Then one night, I heard the footsteps again, only this time they stopped directly beneath my bedroom. I was lying in bed, and it sounded like whoever it was standing still in the room below me. I held my breath and listened. After maybe 10 seconds, I heard a very light tapping sound. 3 taps, then silence. I can't explain the feeling going through my body at that point. It felt like I was being watched in that moment, even though that made no logical sense. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend asking if I could come stay at his place. While I was waiting for him to answer, I heard the tapping again. 3 more taps in the same spot. I left without even changing clothes. The next day, my friend came back with me because I didn't want to be there alone. We checked the whole place and again found nothing, but when we got to the downstairs kitchen, he crouched near one of the lower cabinets and said, "What is that?" There was a cigarette butt jammed way in the back under the cabinet toe kick, almost hidden. It looked fresh. That instantly made everything real for me. Somebody had been in there. At that point, I stopped caring if I sounded paranoid. I called the landlord again and told him exactly what we found. He seemed more concerned this time and said he'd drive over the next day. That night, I stayed somewhere else. When he got there the following afternoon, he called me and said there was nothing obvious, but one of the back windows downstairs didn't lock right. It looked closed, but from outside, it could be forced up enough for a thin person to get in. He said maybe somebody local had figured that out and was using the empty first floor when no one was around. Hearing that made me feel sick. I asked him if he was going to fix it right away, and he said yes, but I'd already decided I was done. What really pushed me over the edge happened that same evening when I went back one last time to get some clothes and my laptop. I was upstairs stuffing things into a duffel bag when I heard a sound come from below that I hadn't heard before. It was a cough, and there was no mistaking it. It came from the first floor hallway. For about 2 seconds, I just stood there digesting what I just heard. Then I grabbed the bag and ran out so fast I left half my stuff there. I called the cops again from my car. This time they actually found evidence someone had been coming in. Near the back window, there were fresh marks and dirt on the sill, and in a closet downstairs, they found an old blanket I had never seen before. I moved out that weekend. Ever since then, any sound in the house at night hits me differently. My name is Chris, and this happened when I was 22. I was living in the upstairs of a mother-daughter house owned by our parents, with my older brother Tom living downstairs. The setup was pretty simple. My part of the house upstairs was one big open space for the living room, kitchen, and dining area, then a hallway that led to the bathroom, a spare bedroom I used as a big walk-in closet, and my bedroom at the end. Tom had his own separate entrance downstairs, and we had a door that connected the 2 floors from inside. It worked out well because we had our own space but could still get to each other if needed. One week, Tom went to Mexico with his fiancée, so I had the whole place to myself. The night in question started completely normal. I got home around 7, threw something on TV, and started cooking dinner. Chicken and rice, something simple that didn't require much attention. I had the TV going in the background, and everything was normal. Around the time I was cleaning up, I thought I heard a noise from downstairs. I'm not sure how to describe it other than just a basic thud. Like it could have came from the wall, on the floor, I don't know. Just a thud. I stopped what I was doing and listened for a bit. I assumed it was something settling or something falling over slightly. The normal assumptions. The downstairs had been empty for a few days already since Tom left. Still, it felt random enough that I muted the TV and stood there for a bit. I didn't hear anything else, but I didn't like the feeling of ignoring it. So I went over to the door that led downstairs, which was already open, and went down to check. I turned on the lights and walked through every room. His living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. Everything looked exactly how it should. So I went back upstairs, finished cleaning, put everything away, and then sat on the couch for a while watching TV. After maybe an hour or so, I got tired and decided to go to bed. It didn't take long for me to start drifting off. Then, out of the blue, I heard music start playing from the living room. It was loud enough to instantly wake me up. It took me a second to even process what I was hearing. It was coming from my Amazon Alexa on the counter in the kitchen area. The song itself was some kind of slow instrumental song I had never heard before. It had a sort of dark vibe to it. I yelled Alexa stop from my bed a couple times, but it didn't respond. I got more annoyed than anything and got out of bed, went into the hallway, and said Alexa stop louder. The music shut off right away. I looked at it for a second, pretty much knowing it was likely just a glitch. I went back into my room and got back into bed. A few minutes later, just as I was starting to fall asleep again, I heard the Alexa say, "Sorry, I didn't quite get that."
I'm having trouble understanding.
I got up again, walked into the living room, and unplugged it from the wall completely. I remember thinking that would be the end of it. Clearly that confirmed the thing was glitching out. I went back to my room, and this time I fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up suddenly to loud music again. It took me a second to even understand what was happening because I was still half asleep. Then it hit me. The music was coming from the living room again. I shot out of bed immediately because I remember unplugging the Alexa. There was no way it should have been on. I walked down the hallway slower this time. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but I felt very uncomfortable now. I called out Alexa stop as I got closer, and the music shut off instantly. I then looked at the counter. The Alexa was plugged back into the wall. I just stood there staring at it for a few seconds. You would too if you were in the same situation. I knew without a doubt I unplugged it, unless I sleepwalked and plugged it back in. I remember pulling the cord out myself. There was no doubt about that. That's when that feeling in your stomach that something's really wrong hit me.
I didn't check anything else because I was too scared. I turned and went straight back to my room and locked the door. Thank God it had a lock. I grabbed my phone and texted Tom asking if he came back early and was messing with me. But as I was typing, I saw at the top of the screen under his name, it said, Location Mexico. If this didn't already seem weird, now this felt straight up like a nightmare. I pulled the chair over to the door so I could sit and listen for anything on the other side. I didn't hear anything at first. Everything was completely quiet. I stayed like that for probably 10 minutes with my ear up on the door. Then I heard something that I will never forget. From out in the living room, I heard a whisper. It was quiet, but clear enough to understand what it was. It said, Alexa, play, and then something I couldn't make out. My entire body went numb. It was like all the weight dropped out of me at once. Before I could react, the Alexa responded, and music started blasting again from the living room. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of dreadful fear before. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but instead of being quiet about it, I just started yelling that I was calling 911 and telling whoever was out there to get the F out. I don't know why I did that. I think I just panicked. I was 22, scared, and defenseless. My first priority wasn't getting this person arrested, rather just getting them out. The music was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I had no idea if the person was still out there or not. The operator answered, and I told them someone was in my house. When the song finally ended, I yelled Alexa stop again from inside my room. It worked. The cops showed up a few minutes later. I stayed in my room until they were inside and calling my name. When I came out, I explained everything as best I could. They checked the entire upstairs and then went downstairs too. After a few minutes, they came back and said there was no one in the house. I don't know if that made me feel good or bad. Good on one hand that the danger was gone, bad on the other that they got away. One of them told me that my front door was wide open when they got there. That front door was without a doubt locked, at the very least closed. That meant whoever it was had left through there, but it didn't explain how they got in. The officers eventually left after telling me to call again if anything else happened. I locked the front door, locked the door to the downstairs, and didn't sleep much the rest of that night. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about something. The downstairs apartment had been empty for days while Tom was gone. There was a part of me that couldn't shake the idea that someone might have been staying down there and just came upstairs that night to harass me and scare me. That thought bothered me more than anything else that actually happened, so I stayed at a friend's place the next night. When Tom got back 2 days later, I had already told him everything. We went through both parts of the house again and didn't find anything obvious missing or out of place. My brother only believed me because I showed him proof of the police having come there. Otherwise, he'd have thought it was a joke to scare him. The first thing we did was install cameras around the house, front, back, and inside by both doors. Nothing like that happened after that. Eventually, our parents made us get our own apartment so they could rent that house out for extra income. In a weird way, I was happy to get out of there because when something like this happens, it sticks with you, and it becomes attached mentally to that place where it happened.
My girlfriend of 7 years and I rented a beach house Airbnb in the Hamptons on Long Island in 2018. My girlfriend's name is Alicia. The house was very secluded, and it literally sat right on the beach, like back door led to the dunes. It was also more or less a completely private beach during the day, except for the occasional locals going for walks or jogs along the dunes. We were there for 3 days and 2 nights. During the daytime, for the most part, we'd lay in the sand with drinks, or we'd jump in the pool in the backyard of the house. The first night, we went to some local bars to drink a little bit, then went back to the house to relax and watch a movie. The second day there, like I said, we basically did the same thing as the first day, only this time we hopped in the pool first before going to lay on the beach to dry off. The house was absolutely gorgeous, a fantasy home for Alicia and I. Woods surrounding the house, pool in the backyard, and beach 10 steps from the back door. It all seemed like it was going to be a fantastic weekend getaway. We stayed on the beach for many hours, until around maybe like 4 or 5. Right as we started packing up and I stood up, I looked at the house, at one of the windows specifically, and I thought for sure I could see someone standing at the window, looking down at me. The sun was kind of creating a glare on the window at its current position, so I couldn't tell 100% if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I grabbed Alicia's shoulder and pointed up at the window. "Do you see that?" I asked. When she said, "See what?" I could see that whatever I thought I saw didn't seem to be there anymore. I told her to keep packing up while I ran back to the house and up the stairs to the bedroom window where I thought I saw someone or something. The room was empty though, as was the closet, under the bed, and the rest of the upstairs rooms. The only noise was the sound of the window air conditioners in various rooms, and then the door opening downstairs. It was Alicia arriving with the stuff, so I chalked it up as seeing things after lying in the sun for hours. That night we hit a couple of the same bars again. We stayed out later this night because it would be our last night there. I think we got back around 11. Upon entering the living room, we tried to flick the lights on, but they wouldn't. Then we noticed all the digital clocks from the cable boxes were off too, so the power was out. I looked around for a circuit box, but couldn't find one. It was way too late to call the homeowner. All that would happen is we'd miss out on watching a movie that night. We were tired anyway, so we just went upstairs using our phones to provide us enough light to prevent us from falling on our faces up the stairs. We went to bed, and the alcohol in Alicia's system helped her knock out pretty quickly. But then, I sat up when I felt like I heard something from outside of the room. I looked at the doorway. Someone walked past the doorway in the hall. I covered my mouth with my hands to prevent my squeal of horror from being heard. I lifted myself over Alicia to get off the bed and run to lock the door. The second I locked it, there were knocks on the other side, and someone said, "It's the landlord. I came to fix the power." I didn't believe it for a second. The knocks turned to more aggressive bangs, and the door started to shake as the man on the other side started twisting and shaking the doorknob. My girlfriend woke up and started to scream as she realized what was going on. I screamed, "Call the cops," to her, and I think this caused the man on the other side to stop. The next thing that happened after waiting in silence and fear was the sound of the police officers downstairs. They had entered the house through the front door that was apparently left open. The police investigated, took a report, and said they'd let the local media know of the incident. They even helped us find the circuit box and restore power. The next day, we left first thing in the morning, and on the ride home, I called the landlord, who said he hadn't even been near the Hamptons for a few weeks. The story I'm going to be telling you took place around 4 years ago as of today. I haven't told many people about this story because it's something I try to forget. Here's my story. It was a Monday evening, 4th of July. I just finished sophomore year in high school. I was invited to a few 4th of July parties. My parents grounded me a few days prior, so I couldn't go to any of them. However, I live in a neighborhood that's very connected, so my neighbors had a party outside in the cul-de-sac. My parents forced me to come outside for it. I'm not extremely awkward or anything, but I hate talking to older adults because I never know what to talk about. Luckily, I had a friend named Eli who lived in the same area, so I called him up and we hung out at the party. After a few minutes at the party, we got extremely bored. It just wasn't fun for us because there was no one our age in the area. We talked a little bit. Then Eli asked, "Doesn't Savannah live like down this street? We should go door ditch her." I agreed to Eli's suggestion, and we were on our way down the street. To clarify, Savannah is that extremely popular girl that every guy has a crush on in high school. It was awkward enough that we were neighbors, but her dad was also my dentist. We made our way down the street. The sun began setting quickly. Eli and I made jokes about dumb things we found funny at the time. Being honest, we were both pretty nerdy our sophomore year. I eventually asked Eli if he knew where the house was located because I'd never been to Savannah's house before.
after scanning the whole area of houses, Eli began pointing to my west. He was pointing at a big house that was pretty complex. We lived in a mediocre area in Michigan. Houses like this one were rare here. Anyway, we sneakily approached the house. It was only to our surprise that no one was home. No cars in the driveway, the lights were off, nothing. We both began observing the house. We agreed that she probably went on a trip with her family. I suggested that we come back next week and do the door ditch. Eli didn't listen though. He kept staring at the house. He approached the front door. "Eli, let's go," I yelled. He told me to be quiet as he opened the front door. His face lit up. They left the door unlocked. Eli suggested that we explore the house and that it would be quick. Being the curious teens we were, we entered the house. It was dark and extremely cold. We both split up, exploring the enormous house. I went into every room of the house and began to feel extremely guilty because that was considered breaking into someone's house. Also, we were invading the family's privacy. After a few minutes of contemplation, Eli began screaming. I walked over to the screams and found Eli. He was leaving what I believe was Savannah's room. "Why are you screaming?" I asked. He began walking me to the nearest bathroom. He locked the door and started whispering, "There was someone watching me in the closet." I tried reassuring him the person was probably a family member who thought we were breaking into the place. He immediately responded, "Why would he be hiding in a girl's room then?" From what I saw, the room's walls were entirely white, the bed covers were white, and it just overall gave off a girl's room vibe. I became suspicious myself. That was when we began to hear footsteps approach the bathroom door. We tried listening, but the walking seemed to stop. I told Eli to be quiet. Someone started mumbling something outside the door. Shortly after, there was knocking on the door. It started out soft. As it continued, it got louder and louder. It sounded as if someone was trying to break down the door. It started becoming a scene out of a horror movie when the person started screaming. It was a man's scream. I turned around and panically tried to open the window behind us. It was bolted down. I thought we were dead. There was a wrench right next to the toilet, and I used it to destroy the window. We jumped out of it and fell onto the bushes below. I still managed to break my ankle, but we ran out of there fast. Both Eli and I were so confused as to who that person was and what their intentions were. A few days passed, and the family came back. I couldn't take the guilt anymore. I turned myself into the cops and admitted to breaking in. The cops asked me a few questions. Later, they sat me down with my dentist, or the homeowner. I began the conversation with, "Yes, I'm guilty, but the guy hiding in your daughter's closet nearly tried killing me." My dentist showed mercy and didn't press charges. However, he just started to become anxious as he told me, "We never invited anyone to stay at our house." I used to work at this small sleepaway camp as a counselor. It was my first job when I was 17. It was the most fun I could have at any job that age. Plus, it would get me away from my parents' house for a month. I didn't exactly come from an enviable background. So at this camp, there were 5 buildings. The boys' dorms, the girls' dorms, the counselors' dorms, the main hall, which we called the shack, and a small bathroom building. In the shack was the cafeteria, main office, and nurses' quarters, where any kids who suffered any kind of injuries would be brought. Kids' curfews would be 9 o'clock. Curfews only meaning they weren't allowed out of the dorm buildings past that time. I made good friends with this guy named Johnny. He was 3 years older than me, but we got along. It was a Friday night. I remember because I knew it was the start of the weekend. So for fun, Johnny and I went to hang out with these 2 girl counselors, who I'll leave their names out for privacy since I haven't seen them in many years. The 4 of us went out to the woods to smoke. One of the girls were mid-sentence when all we heard was a crunch of leaves in the vicinity. Surely a footstep. All of our heads turned the same way and at the same time. We all heard it. Then, a few seconds later, there was a blinding flash. We didn't understand at first.
Unnerved, all of us cut the smoke sesh short and exited the woods at an extremely quick pace. Being back on the campgrounds felt a lot safer immediately, but we became paranoid that we were being watched by one of the camp supervisors, and that the flash was a picture being taken. We would surely get fired if we were caught smoking weed. So in a paranoid panic, we all rushed to our respective dorm buildings. The thing about me when I smoke weed though, I get extremely paranoid and overthink everything. So as I sit in my bed, it ate away at me, wondering if it was indeed a camera flash, and who took that picture. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go to the shack and see if any of the supervisors were still working and come clean. Every counselor had a key to the building, so I unlocked the door that led to the cafeteria section, and the door slammed behind me, echoing into the dark, empty building. The only light was coming from that hallway, which I would take to get to the main office, hoping there would be someone still working. You may think I was crazy to be doing this, but I'm not exaggerating when I say I get paranoid, and I really couldn't afford to lose this job over something that wasn't even my idea. However, I would feel out whichever supervisor was on duty and see if they had actually seen what we were doing. As I walked down the hall towards the office, though, I realized quickly that the office light was off. No one was in the building. Just then, I heard the familiar sound of the cafeteria exit door that I had just went through slamming again. Was I seen entering the building? Was I being followed? I hid behind the intersecting hallway wall, peeking my head around, waiting to see who would be walking into the hallway. No one ever did, though. But it took me longer than it should have to notice something peering around the doorway to the cafeteria. It was a person's head. They were doing exactly what I was doing, peering in my direction. When I realized this, I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest exit, feet stomping on the wood flooring. I ran to the counselor dorm, where only 3 counselors were still chilling in the common area, one of them being Johnny. I told him and only him about what I just witnessed. I didn't know what to think other than I was being followed. I think Johnny could tell I was being a little extra paranoid because I was high, so he told me to just go to my room and lock the door. He made sure to lock the main entrance to the building because I think I scared him too. That night I lay awake for a while, thinking, nervous. So many unanswered questions from one night. The beds in every counselor's room lay right next to a window without blinds, so moonlight would pour in on clear nights, but not on this cloudy night. It was just pure darkness. Until, however, many hours after laying down, a flash filled my room. Lightning? No. There was no thunder, not even rain. I looked at the window, and all I saw was someone's silhouette out there. When they noticed me noticed them, I saw their hand making a waving motion at me. That was the last straw. I left my room screaming for Johnny. He had already gone to bed at this point, so I banged on his door till he opened up. I told him the man who was following me was at my window, so he went to check with me, but figures, he was gone. Johnny asked me if I was still high. I told him not at all, it had been hours. I asked if we should call the cops or something. He said no. He told me to sleep on the floor in his room with my blankets if it made me feel better. Low-key, I think he wanted me to because he was scared just like I was. I didn't understand why on the surface he was pretending to not take this seriously, given that he saw the first flash in the woods with me. I did sleep in his room though. I didn't want to sleep alone, I was too terrified. The next day, I went to the main office to talk with one of the supervisors. She didn't really know what to do. She didn't call the police, but she gave me permission to call them if something else happened, for the safety of the children. But nothing happened again. Not until the last day on the job for counselors. This was when the kids had already went home, and it was the day we were supposed to pack up and leave. I woke up to 4 pictures taped on my window. One zoomed in on me in the woods that night with Johnny and the 2 girls. A second picture of me sleeping in my bed. A third picture of me entering the shack building that night we smoked, confirming I was being watched and followed. And the 4th picture, a zoom in of my license plate number. I took the photos and showed them to the same supervisor. She kept them for evidence after writing down my whole story, including the smoking weed part. This was many years ago now, and nothing ever happened again. but I was scared to death that the picture of my license plate was some kind of threat that whoever it was would track me. I still don't know who took those pictures.
This happened last October, close to Halloween. My parents and brother were making the trip from Florida to Tennessee to help my grandmother move into our house, and they wouldn't be back for a few days. Naturally, I thought it would be nice to have the house to myself for a couple days instead of traveling for hours in a car. On the second night of enjoying the alone time in my house, my heart dropped when I heard almost what sounded like a hand slap against my bedroom window. My house is one story in a rural area with few neighbors. After ruling out any animals or natural ways this could have happened, I decided to take a look for myself, so I moved the blinds to see if I could get a look at anyone running, hoping it was just a prank. I was almost annoyed to see no one, but what happened next made the situation go from confusing to frightening. When I started to hear the doorknob to the door being forcefully shaken and twisted, causing almost a bang at the door, and because of this, my dog started barking loudly, increasing my adrenaline in the situation. Thinking it could still just possibly be a prank by one of my few friends that knew I was alone, I began recording a video on Snapchat to send to my friends so that I could maybe confirm it was one of them. The first video starts with me standing a few feet back from the door to see if I could record it being moved again, and eventually I try to record outside the glass doors. The video ends when I'm terrified to hear behind me that my screened-in patio back door was just forced open. Before I could even turn around, my phone drops to the floor. I send the first video to my 3 friends. Whoever this was behind my house still couldn't get inside, but it was freaking me out knowing they weren't afraid to try. I wait a few minutes, and 2 of my friends send snaps from their homes, claiming their innocence and asking to keep them updated. Still a little freaked out, I realized my last friend Logan had opened the snap but didn't respond, which ironically would be the one person out of my group to try something like this. Feeling more confident it was Logan, I decided to start a new video with flash on and try to take a look from the backyard if there was anyone in the open grass yard. After making sure the front door was locked, I walked out hoping Logan would pop out to try and scare me. I checked behind some bushes and scrap wood on the side of my house, but instead I was greeted with just darkness and quiet. Only after 15 seconds of walking outside, I was immediately uncomfortable with the situation I was putting myself in. My fears got the better of me, and I decided to just go back inside. I stopped the video and returned to my living room. Logan finally responds to my snap, causing my breathing to halt when I see a picture of him in bed with his girlfriend saying, "What the fuck, bro, call the cops." I immediately call 911 and make sure no windows or doors could be unlocked. I was advised to keep all doors locked and to call back if I hear any more forceful entry noises. It was only days later that I would re-watch the saved videos to find a creepy black figure watching me behind my tool shed while I searched behind the scrap wood and bushes, almost looking like they were deciding to attack me or not. Seeing it for the first time, and even now, makes me want to throw up from fear. Nothing has happened since, but I still wonder how someone knew I was alone that day, and what could have happened had I made eye contact with the figure watching from the corner of that shed.
I'm a 17-year-old boy living in a small neighborhood in the Midwest of the United States. The neighborhood I live in is a tight-knit community, one where everyone knows each other and is usually friendly towards one another. My street is a small cul-de-sac with 3 houses on each side and 1 at the end. The cul-de-sac itself rests on a small hill. At the bottom is a lake surrounded by forest and other houses. It's not a very dense forest, but it's far away from any densely populated city, and it gets very quiet at night, with the exception of some dogs barking, a late-night driver, and on rare occurrences, you can hear a coyote in the distance. One night at around 2 a.m., both my mother and older brother, whom I live with, were off in their respective rooms, either sleeping or just keeping to themselves. I too was about to go to sleep, and at the time was just resting and watching a YouTube video in bed. A few videos in, I heard a strange sound coming from across my room. It was a sort of soft thud, as if someone had lightly tapped the wall across from my bed. I wasn't alarmed when I first heard it, figuring it was my cat Spot coming to sleep at the foot of my bed. I sat up to see what he was doing, but he was nowhere to be found. In fact, there was nothing in my room that was out of place or that could even make such a noise. However, I didn't hear the noise again, so I went back to YouTube, and after a while, completely forgot that it even happened. That was until I heard another noise. But unfortunately for me, this noise was not a quiet thud or tapping sound. It was much more unsettling. Coming from outside, in the direction of the lake, I heard loud screeching sounds. I thought it might have been some kind of animal, but it sounded eerily similar to a child crying, or maybe even screaming. I opened my window to get a better listen to what I was hearing, and took a recording to show my friend. By this point, I was starting to get a bit freaked out, so I went to my brother's room to see if he heard it too. I was hoping that maybe it was all in my head, and that I was just tired, but no, he heard it too. The friend I sent the recording to agreed it was creepy, and sounded like either an animal in pain or a crying kid. The more I thought about it, the creepier it became. If it was an animal in pain, why haven't I ever heard a sound even remotely similar to this in the many years I've lived in this house? It didn't sound even remotely similar to a fox, coyote, or any animals I know about, and this forest isn't big enough for an animal much bigger than that. And if it was a child, why was it alone, screaming and crying in the woods in the middle of the night? Then there was that thud that I heard from earlier that night. Was that somehow connected, or is it simply a coincidence that I heard 2 creepy sounds in the matter of minutes? I haven't heard any kind of noises like that since, and by that I am glad. But to this day, it still creeps me out that none of us could truly figure out what could have created those sounds. I live in an apartment in a 2-family house. I'm on the lower level. The owner of the house, Rob, lives upstairs sometimes, but he has multiple houses, so he's not really here that often. Rob and I are pretty much friends by this point, so he tells me when he's going to be gone for extended periods of time. During the time of this story, Rob had told me he'd be gone for 2 weeks out of state. He told me this so that I would know that I could put both my cars in the driveway. I spend a lot of my nights in the living room reading. My level of the house has access to the back door and the deck outside, so you can probably guess where this story's going. I was reading my book on the couch in the living room by the lamp. Complete silence in the room aside from the night crickets outside. Just the way I liked it. When bang. There was quite literally a bang on the glass of the sliding back door. I obviously jumped out of my skin. That door led to the backyard. Nobody should ever be back there knocking on it. I wondered if maybe Rob had returned early, but that didn't seem likely. It was just one distinct bang though. It could have been a fox or a possum running into it by accident. Still, I got up to go check it out. I moved the sliding blind out of the way of the door and turned on the deck light. The deck was clear though, as I thought it would be. I live in the calmest town ever anyway. Break-ins are never heard of here. I closed the blind on the door again though, just because I do get a little uncomfortable with the idea in the back of my head that someone's outside in the dark just watching me. I think that's a pretty normal feeling. A while passed because I finished a whole nother chapter in my book, when it happened again. This time though, it wasn't just a singular bang. It was a bunch of deliberate knocks or bangs on the glass. It had to be a person. It went on for a bit, so I turned off the lamp, and this is where I picked up my phone and started recording.
As I opened the blind and flicked on the light to the deck, the noises stopped, and there wasn't a single person in sight, not even an animal. I looked over the edge of the deck to see if maybe someone jumped over the railing. Nope, nothing. I didn't stay outside for long. I couldn't lock that door quick enough when I went back inside. By this point, I just went to my bedroom and shut the door and laid in my bed. I didn't know what the hell I had just witnessed outside, how there could be knocks at the door one second, then nobody there the next second. I was calling it a night. I wasn't planning on leaving my room again after that. I browsed Instagram and YouTube for a while on my phone, then turned it off and tried to go to sleep. Silence for the longest time. And then right at the foot of my bed, there was a noise. The sound of someone exhaling. I screamed and dove for the light switch, and when the light turned on, my room was empty. I stood paralyzed, breathing heavily for a moment, trying to comprehend what just happened. I searched under the bed and the closet, but there wasn't a soul in my room. I know what I heard though. It wasn't in my head, just like the door wasn't in my head. I slept in the living room after that, though I didn't feel much safer in there, fearing I'd hear bangs at the back door again. It was a relatively sleepless night for me. Rob told me he's never experienced anything like this, and he couldn't think of anyone who might have wanted to target him for anything. I never had believed in anything paranormal until that night. I haven't had any experiences that intense ever since, though.